Gentlemen, colleagues, this is the meeting of the British Transport Police Authority on the 25th of June 2024. Could I ask that colleagues have phones switched to silent, with one exception I know about, and we will kick off. There is a strange camera rig in the centre of the room. You may have noticed that will rotate if you deign to speak at any point, so that you are on camera as well, and this is being recorded and transmitted live. Do we have any apologies, Alistair?
We have apologies from Fiona Brunskill today, Chair.
Stuart Jackson? Have we had anything from Stuart?
He said he was going to join electronically.
So Stuart may be joining in part later, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any declarations they wish to make in terms of any item on the agenda? Thank you very much. Could I draw your attention to the minutes of the last meeting? As usual, I will go through them page by page. There's quite a lot of them. And if you have any comments or amendments to make, please just shout out as we get to that page. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. No comments for anybody. Can we take those minutes as read, please? Thank you. Let's now look at item 4, matters arising. 124, Pangbourne incident. That's in progress. Is there any update with that?
Well, I thought Sean could probably cover that off under his item, if that's
yeah,
okay.
That's absolutely
and then
fine.
If members have got any questions.
And the remainder of the items are completed. Does anybody have any points they wish to raise in respect to them? Okay, thank you very much. Let's move swiftly on. Strategic risk queue.
I was going to ask Rubila just to update us on where we got with this, if she can hear us and contribute from the fact that she can hear us.
So, just going to speak a bit about the work from the 21st of May where we did the risk horizon scanning. So we'll be using that work from 21st of May to inform this quarter's reviews of the strategic risks. So there'll be meetings with each risk owner, and as well as doing the normal refresh, we'll also be looking at the work that was done on the 21st of May and trying to start incorporating some of that work into the risks and asking risk owners about their thoughts on that. And that will be brought to the next quarter of meetings. In addition to that, we'll also start thinking about the operational impacts for each risk as well, and incorporate those as well into the risks. So hopefully by the next quarter meetings, there'll be a refreshed product, and you will start seeing some of the information from 21st of May in there. It won't necessarily be the final product, because we have actually got some deep dives in the year as well as further meetings for the risks where we're not having deep dives. So as agreed at ARAC last week, the deep dive risks this year will be cybersecurity, partnership working, financial sustainability, and potentially health, safety and well-being. And I do say potentially because we are going to go back and work on those, maybe assess those again, because I know a lot of work has already been done on health and safety and well-being as well. But hopefully, definitely by the next quarter and as the year progresses, you will see the work from 21st of May incorporated into the risks, and also looking at the risk appetites as well.
Thanks, Rubila. Does anybody have any points they wish to raise or questions for Rubila?
Ron, can I raise a
yes,
question?
Please, Diane. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you. Rubila, on the deep dives, is there a proposal to bring in any kind of external experts to participate in the deep dives and have that kind of independent challenge? Certainly in some of the areas it might be helpful.
So in the previous deep dives that I was involved with, when I was here previously, we didn't have external people, but what we did have is various people from across the organisation to feed into that process, and that only happens at the deep dive. It doesn't happen at the refresh every quarter. Every quarter tends to be kind of a fairly close group of people coming together to do that. And I did find that did bring in a lot of different viewpoints, so in that way it was good. I also know that Mel may be able to speak a bit more about this, but we do send our risks over to the insurers and ask them to kind of do a kind of review on those as well. But for the risk deep dives themselves, it tends to just be bringing in different people from the organisation so that we have a kind of much more broader view of the risk.
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking specifically on cyber, where it's so fast changing. There might be an external expert that we can bring in, you know, just around to make sure that we've got the right controls in place. I'm not an expert in that area, but it might have value. But I'll just leave it there. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Anybody else? Kenna?
I think probably just to repeat maybe some of the discussion we had at the May workshop, if you look at the Q3 residual scores and then the Q4 residual scores, there has been absolutely no change. So despite all the actions that are happening, and I know this is a long-term picture, not a short-term, we wouldn't necessarily expect to see a change quarter by quarter, it appears that we're not really moving the needle. And I think if we'd looked at the trend over the last probably 4 quarters, we'd have seen very little move in the residual score. So, you know, two conclusions. Either the residual score and the gap to target score is so large, we need to think about our risk appetite and resetting the target score as we discussed, or we need to come up with some more actions that are going to close that gap, because we can't continue quarter after quarter after quarter saying, oh, there's a big gap between where we want to be and where we are. So as part of the work in the quarterly reviews, Revealer, that definitely needs to be looked at.
Anybody else? Anything else you want to add here?
No, thank you.
Can we note that item, please? Policing plan performance. Alistair normally take us through that.
He did. So Alistair did send his apologies. He's on leave. But Mel is going to talk to this item, and then we might come in at the end. So
Sure.
it's over to Mel.
Thank you. I'll start with just a bit of an overview of disruption. So trespass continues to be what's causing the most kind of delay minutes for us. We saw an increase of 10% in trespass incidents last year compared to the previous year. And that's primarily linked to children and young people, which is the trend that we have kind of continued to see. So nothing new as such to report there. And in terms of the delay minutes, we have seen a increase in the delay minutes compared to the previous year, but a 3% reduction in the number of incidents compared to the same period between April and May. So between April and May, we saw a little bit of a reduction in activity. In terms of the other areas, I was just going to kind of cover briefly. So we've had an overall, in terms of the number of notifiable crimes recorded, so we've had an increase of about 19.1% compared to previous years. Our overall solved rate was 12.6%, which was slightly lower than the previous year. And the biggest kind of contributors in terms of crime were TPP, so theft of passenger property, violence and public order, with theft of passenger property making up 28% of that. In terms of reductions that we saw this year, so we've seen line of route serious, pedal cycle and theft of cable and plant. There were all reductions in that area, which is positive. The other thing I was just going to mention is the increase in solved sexual offences rates. So we've seen an 11.6 increase in that, and there have been 105 more robbery offences being solved compared to the previous year. We've also seen an increase in the number of crimes solved against staff victims and an increase in solved crimes for hate crime offences. So I think that's approximately about 16% this year, which I think is down 1% from last year, I think. Yeah. And I think in terms, the only thing I was just going to finish with before handing over to colleagues was in terms of the overall notifiable crimes per million passenger journeys, so that was 28.
Okay, thank you very much. Lucy, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think probably be helpful at this point if there's any questions by from members, and we're quite happy to take them.
Craig.
Yeah, thank you. Just to highlight, and it was touched on, we looked quite a lot at the Performance Committee around the issues around robbery, because those figures are quite challenging. They're challenging across the country on robbery, and we're seeing a lot more understandable public coverage about the issues around robbery. It might be useful at some point we take wider members through some of the stuff that the force is doing, because we saw it at the Performance Committee. There is an awful lot going on robbery, and understanding how much of that spike is London. You know, the challenges of B Division on robbery. If you take B Division out of that, I suspect the robbery figures actually look okay.
Yeah.
If there ever is such a thing.
Yeah, so I mean, there's roughly 75% of all robbery is reported in London, so essentially that's the primary driver. I'm pleased to say it has plateaued since the sort of peak towards sort of the end of last year into the start of this. We've actually seen less robberies reported in this April, May than we did previous April, May, so that's a good news story. As I was discussing earlier, warm weather tends to, increase many types of offences, not necessarily robbery, but we know that the precursor activity to robbery offences tend to be public order and violence offences, and we know that the weapons seizures have increased significantly this year. So there's more weapons on the network, which again is a sort of precursor indicator to robbery. So we're not complacent. As you say, there are many operations that we're running on a daily basis around robbery, but they are largely focused in and around the London area and targeting specific groups in company with the Met and the City of London.
Thank you. Ian?
Thanks, Chair. Looking at the figures on violence against women and girls, sexual harassment, hate crime, we're seeing some quite considerable increases there. There's still good solve rates, which is excellent. I suppose the issue I'm wondering about is whether that's putting additional pressure on resources. What does it mean in terms of rejigging resources to make sure that those extra reportings which we're seeing, probably because of media campaigns, as it suggests, are getting the full allocation of policing resource they need to get solve rates kept up?
Yeah, so Ian, thank you for that question, and actually your observations are absolutely right. So I think the campaigns are making greater accessibility for people to report in on the crimes, whether it's the single online hub, or actually you'll see from my report the 61016. We're seeing every year an increase, and I think I personally think that's a positive in terms of people's access. Charlie will say last month we had the highest usage of 61016 that we've ever had since it started, and I think certainly at the end of last year we were up to around about 210,000 reach outs into that, and we're seeing it as starting to become much more the preferred reach out. It is placing a demand, and I think the demand is in a couple of areas. So from a call handling perspective there is an increase in demand, then in terms of the response, and also some of them are quite complex investigations in order for us to deal with. So the demand on the investigative capabilities are high, and then what's accompanies that was part of the investigative process, the digital downloads and the analysis that needs to take place, and I think it's just much more complex, and it's growing in its complexity. At the moment we with the authority's support, obviously, some of the efficiency savings, financial savings that we've made, we have reinvested those in terms of dealing with this increase in demand. So it's sort of, dealing with itself. But I think we are certainly anxious that we will continue to see the demand and want to make sure that we've got the right resources to deal with it. These are often vulnerable victims, they're predatory suspects, and, they need to be dealt with. But we do need to continue to make a hostile environment for predatory sex offenders who are using our network, and we need to make sure that we're investing in the resources to support vulnerable victims. And I think the campaigns, what is really positive for me is, yes, victims are coming forward, but we are also having bystanders come forward and report that. And I've certainly had a lot of positive meeting in some of our positive feedback in our stakeholder environments of just some of the campaigns and the way that we're approaching it. And we're seeing that in our recruitment as well. People are identifying with our campaigns in order to support the strategy, which, as I say, is to create that hostile environment for predatory sex offenders. So at the moment, we have consumed that demand by reprofiling resources and finance, but it is challenging.
And Ian, I'd just add that if you think about it from context, 3 years ago, we had a very small group of highly trained, highly skilled individuals who are investigating those types of crimes. We've adopted significant levels of training and investment in our wider workforce, so you've now got a far wider group of people who firstly are aware of what they're looking for, and then secondly are skilled to investigate that. So in terms of graduating those investigations from this sort of sexual offences touching over clothing right the way through to your most serious sexual offences, there's a graduated approach to investigation, so it's far more evenly spread now across our workforce.
Chair, I think that's helpful. For me, it's very important that if we increase people's confidence to report, that we maintain that confidence by continuing to have the resource there to deal with it, because it would be a flaw if we got more reporting and then didn't do it. So it's reassuring to hear that that's there in place, but maybe something to watch for the future.
Thanks very much, Ian. Hugh, then Paula.
Right. So there was a couple of conversations about robbery and then sexual offences, but I mean, the whole picture, the summary picture, looks like it was a difficult year last year. I heard you, Charlie, at the rail delivery groups, policing and security group, noticing a couple of green shoots, which you echoed just now, possibly in around in April or May, and I don't want, I don't know, you might be a bit cautious about extrapolating from that, but what's the prognosis here? You know, what's going to get better and what's going to get harder over the next year? Well, across all of these?
I think increasingly, I think we are more adept and demonstrating greater levels of capability around serious and organised crime. So I think that in terms of your high harm, high risk crime, I think that we are consistently demonstrating that we are very good at that, and solve rates have improved markedly. I think the challenge for us collectively is around high volume, what I would describe as low threat crime. So theft of passenger property, which we know is a significant interest to industry. Shoplifting, acquisitive crime of that type tends to be very high volume, have low levels of solvability factors. It's largely dependent on sort of witnesses, CCTV, the sorts of things that it's either there or it's not. There are very few lines of investigation beyond that. We've sought to focus our efforts on known offenders or known offending groups that are operating in that space, and particularly in the organised space, because we know we have a disproportionate benefit in terms of impacting those groups. So where we're successful, we tend to see reductions in those types of crime. But largely, given the footfall on the rail network and the propensity for people to sort of commit what they would consider to be low-level acquisitive crime, I don't think that is subsiding. I think for me that's probably the biggest threat, because it's not, it is not at the forefront of our focus, because we're largely focused on high harm offending and high risk offenders.
So I think the positive is you're still highly unlikely to be a victim on our rail network, and I think we should never lose sight of that. 28 crimes per million passenger journeys. I mean, there's a lot of people across Europe and internationally that bite your hand off for that sort of response. But of course, we're never going to be complacent. We're very much aligned to the strategy. So the strategy does focus on high harm offending, so theft, passenger property. Does continue to present a volume challenge, but in terms of risk, it's way lower in terms of the risk factor. I think some of the work that we're doing around prevention, we want to push the boundaries to think differently, in terms of, perhaps working broader than with the rail industry. So how we're working with the insurance sector in terms of, thinking about how property is protected whilst you're on trains. I do always give the analogy that, there are some tickets you buy for some events and you can just immediately pay another £2 to insure your property, and then that's used in collaboration with the industry insurance sector in order for greater prevention. And I think there's more work to be done on the prevention side. But I think with robbery, I mean, I think it depends. Some of those crimes do depend on the economic position. You know, we know that there is a cost of living issue at the moment. We can see that and we can feel that. But again, it's about how we're working collaboratively with all of the stakeholders. So whether it's the security in the shops, you know, they are mini sort of shopping centres at some of our big stations. So how are we working in greater collaboration? And I think the integrated security pilot is a really good example about how do you bring together the collective. So, you know, I would like to say, Hugh, that a positive route for us should be to drive that forward, you know, with the authority's support in terms of greater integration of security moving forward. The green shoots, there are green shoots for robbery, but it always, for those of us who've been dealing with this for a long time, it does fluctuate quite significantly, but there has been a really concerted focus, collaboration with industry. I mean, if you look at London Underground, you know, certainly some of the announcements that are out there, more the presence of security, a much more coordinated approach to putting people with warranted powers at some stations and security at other stations. And I think we've certainly, for 2 months in a row, we've seen the benefits in relation to robbery, but we're definitely never complacent in that area. And also using all of the powers, so, you know, denying people access to the railway who have committed offences. So we're making sure we're using, you know, we're not going to arrest our way out of these sort of challenges. We need to make sure that we're using all of the different bits of legislation that are there. I think in terms of sexual offences, I would say that would continue to rise. You know, if we continue to deliver the outstanding results that we're having with some of these predatory sex offenders, which is to arrest and prosecute them, then the reality and give a good, you know, service to victims, then hopefully I would see that growing in confidence for victims to report that. I mean, I think most women in this room would be able to have possibly been a victim in their lives, or definitely know somebody who has been a victim of unwanted sexual behaviour on the railway, and, you know, we're very committed to stopping that. So I think there is a green shoot that we'll continue to see a rise in reporting, and certainly the rise in our detection rate, which the maths obviously stacks up to a declining statistic. But actually the positive is we are solving more crimes than we've ever solved in terms of sexual offending, which I think is for me is a real positive and something we should be proud of. Disruption. I think that, you know, disruption is a challenge. I mean, Charlie, you had, was it 3 pips?
Three pips in 3 hours yesterday morning. So, yeah.
So we are, you know, we're continuing to see a considerable rise.
Person in precarious position, and I mean the common factors in all of those were mental health or substance misuse, you know, factored as part of their reason for being there.
I think some of the green shoots are, you know, we, as I said in my report, you know, we've welcomed the increase in the capital budget, which has enabled us to push forward with our drones work this year. You know, so we hope to have, you know, by Christmas, a really positive position in terms of using drones to deal particularly with trespassers and, you know, regrettably with some of the suicides. But I think using technology in a better way, that is an advantage. And I think we've been able to progress that by an increase in the capital budget, which will enable us to get the equipment, which we know already, the Economist has shown the financial benefit to the industry and to the UK of reducing disruption if we can speed up our response to some of the police-related delays which can come from trespass particularly. I think we'll get an improving position on that.
Okay, thank you. Paula.
Hugh asked my question, thank you.
Sorry?
Hugh asked my question, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Brian, then Amir, please.
Yes, I think just to echo some of those detection rates, particularly with the high harm stuff, you know, sexual offences, that is really, really positive, and, you know, we should definitely note that. Just picking up on the disruption stuff, so take your point, you know, clearly there's a lot of these, and I think it's worth noting there's probably a lot of them that BTP deal with really well. We do still get, and there's some industry concern that sort of asked me to raise here around some of the protracted ones. So we talked about Pamborne a lot last time, that was heavily involved, same as LA Police. We've obviously had Kensington since we last met. Met-led incident, I think the industry concern is, are we really, you know, from a BTP point of view, are we sure we're doing everything we can to influence the railway's objectives there? I know they're not easy incidents, but are we doing everything in terms of tactics, all the specialist sort of, you know, units we have? And then I suppose the second part of that, and it links to it, is the stakeholder stuff. So I think there was escalation to you, Lucy, from, you know, TfL Commissioner, Chief Executive NR, but are we doing the stuff at the time around, you know, the stakeholder liaison with them to explain that this is really complicated and this is what we're doing? And also probably post-event, because there seems to be an industry perception out there that there's more that could be done. Maybe that's right or wrong, but how do we kind of correct that, and how do we get the industry aware of that sort of stuff? Because, as I say, there's a view that potentially BTP are getting quite risk averse and maybe not using all the options open to them, and that might be completely wrong. But yeah, any thoughts? Welcome.
So I mean, the London incident you referred to, Brian, is an interesting one. So arguably, I think we were happy for trains to operate. I think that was a decision made by the MOM, who effectively said that actually they weren't happy, they didn't think it was safe. So actually, that's why trains were on stop on that particular incident. We worked closely with the Met, as you know.
But did we influence them in terms of getting the person down? Because I think the
absolutely
probably right. But
yeah, so
but that's the bit, the influencing.
Yeah, so we obviously work with our colleagues across the country frequently. The Met being one of those partners, we do try and influence them. We I guess have a unique perspective in terms of the impact of disruption on the railway, and we are very keen to emphasise that. We are very keen to. Particularly when you get road over rail, so essentially where the Home Office force is generally the lead organisation, we explain to them the impact on the economy and the level of disruption. In the case of the London event, you know, there was potential disruption to fuel supplies in, you know, for key parts of our infrastructure. So there were a number of other factors, but there are, I guess, a number of limitations in terms of the tactics you can use in terms of removing someone from who's in a precarious position. Obviously, Article 2 for us is always going to take precedence, so, but we will, where possible, try and get lines open, and if that's a partial opening. In the case of the London event, I think Sean O'Callaghan, who was the Gold Commander, effectively put officers with shields in the cab, largely to protect the driver of that fuel train, so they could move through at caution. So we are willing to consider broader tactics. Interestingly, 2 days before that event, there was another TfL incident which I was Gold Commander for, where there was an incident on a chap on a roof. Thankfully, the lines were actually closed for engineering work, so there was no actual disruption. But when then the post-incident review, we look at, well, how did they gain access? Those effectively insecure ladders attached to sides of buildings. You think, well, there are some fairly basic prevention measures we can take just by putting a sort of hatch on that ladder actually stops them getting up there in the first place. So I think we're always very keen to work with partners. We generally have a good rapport, and we have a good understanding in terms of the things that will improve our position. Some of that is quite expensive in terms of infrastructure and sort of hard changes in terms of access. And then on the other side of that coin, working with health partners and others, where we know there is a higher likelihood of people putting themselves in that position where they are subject to either mental health or substance misuse, as I say. So I think we are trying a range of different options to minimise the opportunity, but also minimise the likelihood of people presenting in that way, because we accept that it causes significant disruption to the railway. I've held a number of national events for with industry around people in precarious positions to look at other tactics, and we've looked at a whole range of things. But arguably, Article 2 will always take precedence, and you know we have to maintain that balance between putting people at additional risk with maintaining the efficient and effective running of the railway.
And the stakeholder stuff, I mean, do we think we're using the SDOs enough? I mean, I used to look after incidents for Network Rail strategically. I probably spoke to the SDOs maybe 100 times. Incredibly rare for them to ever ring the industry. Is there more we could do with the SDO role, do you think, for the live incident?
So I think probably just on a couple of points. So I think from the industry point of view, the engagement is very, very high, and particularly at a tactical level. I think one of the things that the hot debrief from last week's incident showed is that doesn't necessarily reach senior levels within industry. So we need to unpick that with industry to see what the challenges are. And I think there is definitely I mean, it's interesting you say about there is a perception that BTP is becoming a bit risk averse. I think certainly it's felt within BTP that we are opening up the lines, and actually the choice by the mom and others is not to move forward at that point. So it's something I know I spoke to Diane about, actually, because we're not just seeing that, feeling that in London, where we definitely are picking up on that, but we are starting to see that nationally. So we do need to understand the concerns of industry as to why they don't want to open the lines when we're saying, actually, we're comfortable with it. So I think there's a settling, and some of this I think is post-COVID. I think, testing and exercising needs to be reinvigorated, joint testing and exercising needs to be reinvigorated. And I do think we have seen perhaps people in leadership roles that are slightly more risk averse than they were probably prior to COVID, because we had a period of time of, across the board of people not dealing with things. So, but we do need to unpick that, because we would say that's starting to be quite a prevalent position across the country at the moment. I definitely think that the stakeholder meetings that are in existence during live operations are very informative. And the information is shared, but I do think there is an issue as to where that then goes in terms of wider briefing structures, and that it's come out of a couple of the hot debriefs recently. So we just need to unpick that, Brian, and I think make sure we get a sort of a structure that is delivering for everybody, because I think BTP would say we have definitely shared the information and it's on all of the logs. So we need to work out why that isn't perhaps sort of trickling through into industry, into probably some senior levels. And I think that's the benefit of a hot debrief, how we can learn from that and make it a little bit better. I would say tactically some of these are really challenging. I don't think we would have ever expected to have had to put people with shields in trains in order to be able to move forward, but that's the extent that we're going to tactically, because the priority is to keep the railway moving. And that's definitely our prioritisation. And certainly the incident last week, there were other critical and national infrastructure issues that needed to be considered and prioritised.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, just to be clear, because I think you've both misunderstood, when I say risk averse, I don't mean in terms of train running. I think actually anyone who wanted trains to run when there was bricks and things flying around, that would be a bad call. So I see why the mum went that. I meant risk averse in terms of it seems almost, actually that person can sit there for 24 hours, and that's Met decision, I guess, but whether we influence that. So it's the risk averseness around, are we going to go and engage with this person positively for a resolution?
So,
or is
so
it,
I mean,
not train running,
yeah.
Because I think the industry...
I agree with you, but there was a hostage negotiator on scene. We've got hostage negotiators, we've got people working at heights teams that are there.
That's what I mean, all those
at the end of the day, when you've got somebody that's throwing metal bars onto a train, you can't just walk away from it and say that's okay. So, I think in terms of the sort of capabilities to deal with it, I'm pretty comfortable that every conceivable capability was down there to deal with that particular incident, and that was all covered at the hot debrief. I think what might be helpful, if I may suggest in the future, if we are doing a hot debrief, actually, we're quite comfortable for a member to come and join that, actually, so you can just see the granular...
industry and say, well, hang on a minute.
Yeah. I think you can see the granular detail, and you'll probably have more of a sort of wider knowledge of the complexity and the tactics that are used, with the intention of bringing that to a close.
Yeah, and I know they are incredibly difficult, but they're also probably the ones that, going back to your point, less incidents, more minutes, they're the ones that are probably hurting us, aren't they?
Okay, Emir.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, on an annual time period, how many of these operations do we have where you take over a station and did the event and checked everybody like the ones that I attended? How many do we do of those over the course of a year on average?
In terms of testing and exercising?
Yes,
Sean can probably give you the detail later on. Some of those are industry-led and not necessarily led by us. So there's, again, I think, as we move forward, one of the things that we have been suggesting to sort of senior stakeholders is, greater coordination of, testing and exercising on the things, because there are statutory testing and exercising you have to do in terms of countering the threat from terrorism. And then there's the bit that's causing greater probably harm in terms of disruption isn't on a statutory, you haven't got a legal framework to have to do that, but I think we need to kick that back in and, probably see a more coordinated approach with industry.
Tricia.
Super quickly, and just a really helpful conversation. I think the suggestion of more visibility of hot debriefs is a really helpful one, so thank you. I just wonder, though, whether there's a separate kind of conversation, which isn't about each incident, one by one as they come along, but a sort of reflective conversation about several incidents, where I think there's otherwise there's a danger that industry partners are adding together one and one and getting three, or seeing something about intention or policy or strategy or risk posture, which actually isn't drawn from the real experience. So is it worth having that kind of period, that moment of reflection, picking up what's been going over a quarter or a 6-month period, and giving an opportunity to kind of test those things on posture that were coming through from Brian's questions?
Yeah, so
sorry. Sorry, Tricia. It is sort of reported at the Police Security Group. So in terms of talking through, this is what the sort of prevailing picture's been over the last quarter, etc. I think this people in precarious positions and fatality management has been a perennial issue in terms of risk appetite. So I think there are, going back to sort of Brian's earlier point, there are sort of, we will never discount any reasonable tactical options, but we draw limits at dragging people off gantries and totally. Buildings and stuff. And I think that there is a fundamental disconnect between what we think is acceptable risk and what some, and it's not all by any means, partners think is acceptable risk. And I guess it's about getting to a position where you both acknowledge that. And you say, well, actually, okay, we're never going to agree on it, but we accept that that's reasonable. Because ultimately, should it get to a fatality situation, it is the coroner that we will have to answer to. And that's both us and indeed anyone else who's involved. So I think we are happy to have those conversations. There is a sort of regular drumbeat of update that occurs both at a strategic and a tactical level. But I'm happy to take any other suggestions as to how we might improve that.
And just for the avoidance of doubt, I was absolutely not suggesting that anybody around this table is going to second guess any judgment. But what I heard Brian saying is there's a perception out there that if you take several things together, that tells you something about BTP's approach or its policy or its approach to risk. And in fact, from the data, there's a thing going on in April and May this year where you've got kind of reductions in incidents, but big increase in disruption. So I think that asking the question, what's going on in the system, in a way that doesn't just tell the story of individual incidents, might be a helpful thing.
Absolutely.
It's just a suggestion.
No,
and getting some of those senior people that are currently saying things about your approach, which you may want to challenge.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very helpful suggestion. I think if I give you one example briefly, so if you think of traction current, so in terms of actually isolating traction current on a line, it takes a long time to do that, but actually it's a prerequisite. If you've got someone on the line or you need to put officers onto the line, the traction needs to be discharged. Well, arguably, it takes a long time to discharge it, it takes a long time to recharge it, so actually you get extended levels of delay. Well, of course, consequently, industry may be reluctant to discharge current. Why? Because they know what's coming, and actually you'll end up with a number of trains stalled and trapped and everything else. We clearly are fundamentally focused on saving the life of that person. So I think it's those sorts of things where we just need to come closer together and say, well, what is reasonable in those circumstances? And arguably, for us, the coroner will always be the arbiter for that. But I think a very helpful suggestion, and happy to take that forward.
Thanks, Andy.
It's a very quick question, really, because we never really ask it here. How's the justice system serving us at the moment? Because we hear through the media lots of things. I wasn't looking for a long answer, but, have we got cases that we've done all the hard work on, and then it's sort of 3 years before it hits us?
So, I'll give you... we're listing Crown Court trials for 2027. 27?
Prosecution rests.
I think also, the challenge is that, there's prioritisation of offences, which, BTP isn't, some of our offences which cause the disruption, trespass, for example, aren't necessarily going to be a priority for the justice system at the moment. I mean, I think just to add to Charlie's point, the Policing and Security Group does get a comprehensive review. RDG, managing the MDs, you know, they had a full brief last week. You know, I'm starting to worry that this isn't trickling across industry. So I think it would be helpful to understand why not, because we do feel we spend a lot of time briefing a lot of people and sharing a lot of data. So I think we need to understand that. I also think naturally there is never a conversation of the three that were resolved really quickly yesterday. There is never, you know, we know the economic benefit of the work that we're doing with people in precarious positions, and that goes very much under the radar because nobody's sort of knocking the door down to say, you know, there's an issue with those, because they're dealt, and they are very routine, and we're dealing with a high volume of those. And the ones that, you know, you referenced, Brian, you know, fortunately at this moment in time are still a rarity, but they become the thing that everybody talks about.
And maybe that's part of stakeholder stuff, you know, actually in the period, and it'd be great to have it in here, in the period we've had 30, you know, PIPs, of which one was really difficult, because I think that is a really good point. We need to probably...
Yeah, I mean, we're just under 3,000 in a year, you know, I mean, that's what we're dealing with, you know, very well, with some very capable, trained people. Some of those have got hostage, you know, the negotiators.
And it feels like when BTP there and they're in the lead, it goes quite well. But if you think about Pangbourne, TVP, Kensington Met, that seems to be sometimes, I don't know if there's a trend there because there's only two, but that maybe is where, and that's the point around influencing.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, we are the experts. You know, that we are specialists in terms of supporting the railway. And, you know, I would sit here and say that my people are very, very good at what they do.
Is there anything else on policing plan anybody wants to ask or mention? Okay, can we note the plan? Can we move on to financial performance, please? Who's dealing with this?
I think Rabila would introduce it.
Over to you, Rabila, please.
Thank you. So what I would advise is, as we're looking at period one, is not to focus too much on the numbers at the moment, because we are only in period one, and a lot can happen in the year. But I would ask members to focus on the pack itself. So the pack takes the existing FAIR and FLP pack and brings out the most relevant slide to allow the full authority to have oversight, but without too much of the detail. So the first slide details the assumptions that 24-25 budget has been based on, and so it gives clarity from the start of the year around those assumptions that we're working to. The second slide goes around financial performance and the third slide by directorate and activity. And then we have a slide around pay analysis, which gives total FTE broken down by officer, PCSO and staff. And then it also breaks that down into the income streams that we have. So PSA, external funding, TFL. And here you will notice that we're currently over-establishment in PSA, but in other areas we are under. And so I know finance and BTP are already working with HR and recruitment to start rebalancing that's needed, and they're talking to recruitment about that at the moment. But in terms of the numbers at the moment, you know, you'll see a small overspend in the pay. Hopefully that will be brought back. The forecast will be brought back to budget with that rebalancing exercise. There's an income slide, and finally there's a DFT compliance side, which is important because we did have that letter from DFT for 24-25 after the overspend and extra budget that we received last year, and also in terms of Hugh's responsibilities as accounting officer. Just to point out that the DFT numbers for 24-25 are as at P2, while the rest of the pack is at P1, and that's because we have to submit a return to DFT by working day 5 every month. And so we can provide those figures. You know, they're very high level figures and not obviously the detail that you get in the rest of the pack. So I'd welcome feedback on the pack from members. And you know, if there's any additional information that you'd like, it would be good to get kind of quite clear direction on that. Be that there may be a mock-up that you could provide of information that you receive elsewhere, etc. And also, you know, we do have to keep to the principles that, you know, any additional information should be proportionate to the size of organisation that we are, and also keep in mind the resource requirements that are needed to produce any additional information above the pack, which is, you know, a pack which is already being produced. I know there's some areas that I think Ron was speaking about yesterday, but other people have spoken about, and might be that you want some additional information on overtime, because obviously overtime, some of it's covering vacancies, some of it's covering bank holiday working, etc. So it'd be good to understand that a bit more. Any environments between budget lines, so you can understand any movements, and also, as normally you would receive, but just because it's the beginning of the year, a fuller risks and opportunities, but you would normally get that as part of the package, just that it's early on the year at the moment.
Thanks, Rabila. Did you want to add anything here?
Well, only this, but I think it's implicit, but I'll make it explicit. So we haven't, but with the previous item, actually, in times gone by, we didn't talk about operational performance at the full authority so much, and we haven't talked about financial performance at the authority so much. So the hard yards for operational oversight and financial oversight happens in Craig's committee on performance legitimacy and financial matters. But we as an authority have discussed that that means that there's a fair few members who don't get to see the sort of financial performance during the course of the year, and also, as Rabila says, because we've had more scrutiny and we've promised more scrutiny going forward, that's combined to we need to bring a product to the full authority as well. But you're not replicating the job of Craig's committee, still doing that. So it's a question of finding that sweet spot of you are having enough information without essentially replicating the work of another committee, and that's really the context in which Rabila's put her questions.
Andy, then Amir, please, then Paula.
Yeah, we're getting there slowly. We're making heavy weather of it. My comments would be, I think the first slide is a tiny bit of getting my retaliation in first, and I don't think it's adding very much. I think the subsequent two slides about financial performance, we haven't got a commentary for on the variances, which one would expect in any organisation. By contrast, on income, we have got an explanation of variations and so on, which is very helpful. The DFT slides are a necessary boilerplate, but you don't need a report that's much longer than that for this meeting, I would suggest. But we're just missing one of the slides at the moment because we've got no commentary on the thing that matters, which is the variation on spend on costs.
Thank you very much. Amir?
Rabila, just on the slide that says compliance with DFT control totals, in the blue box you talk about DFT business finance business files asked us to include these in the forecast and will ensure to get additional budget cover in subs. Can I just ask, is that done through a note?
So that was, we've spoken about that with DFT, and they've also let me know that when Hugh gets his letter of delegation shortly, there will be a paragraph in there about the agreement that we've reached, that we will be forecasting this number. However, in terms of budget delegation, it will be considered as part of the subs process.
So you get it in writing. You're just talking about the governance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you very much for this. I think I've been one of the people who've been keen to have a very short financial overview at this meeting, so I'm grateful to you for providing this. On the slide in relation to period 2, you say the force does not undertake a full forecast. What is the forecasting pattern? Because for me that's the bit that we would also want to have a meaningful discussion around, is the point at which you're forecasting any significant variance.
I'm smiling because we anticipated that question, Paula, so Steph was going to talk to that.
So we forecast fully every quarter, and we have a much more in-depth, about a 25-point Gantt chart on all the activities that are undertaken through that full forecast. It's a lighter touch at a periodic basis, and what we've discussed a number of times over the past few months is how to get the most relevant information to members as quickly as we can. Part of that, I think, we'll see a real difference on the first quarterly forecast, is at the point it's ready through our Force Executive Board, that's the day before the deadline to the Finance Legitimacy and Performance Committee. So it will be extremely fresh now when it comes through first for the first quarterly reporting, as opposed to last year where we had a couple of months delay on that. So we do have that information all broken down with the activities for the forecasting work through our business reviews, through our internal governance, and happy to share that for any ideas on how we could make it a little bit more lean, or how we can organise our committee dates around it so that it's as relevant and timely as possible.
Thank you.
Abdul?
No, it's a very helpful
pack. I'm just wondering, are we able to get something, you know, when we're in this position, because period 2 has already ended, and then we're now well into period 3, albeit we won't have the data until next month, but having something that is a bit more up to date than what we've got, granted that it is a lot of work to put this together, so it's trying to get to the spot where there's a balance.
And I think that's the challenge for us really on what's going to work best for assurance. We will have the period 2 position from Thursday this week, so whether we share that through the authority on a more regular basis instead of the quarterly committee structure, or if we want to consolidate it and report it through the Finance Legitimacy and Performance Committee first before it comes here, that's a matter really for us to take feedback and see how we think it might be most effectively worked. I think operational performance you get on a more regular basis through BI.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do either. I mean, I think this is a question of timing. I think it's about the 8th of August is our next meeting of finance. So, you know, absolutely see it there. It's probably want to discuss outside about how feasible these are to produce and the workloads involved in them. But I don't think the committee would be proud either way, whether it comes here first or goes to the other committee.
I think the key thing for all of us, speaking for colleagues, is that we want adequate financial control and visibility so that the authority can satisfy itself that what we are seeing reflects accurately what it is that's being spent and any variances that we need to think about, or indeed any trends that will cause us concern, and we can nip in the bud now. Kenna, did you want to add anything from your perspective?
I just wanted to ask, could we consider where we would report capital project forecast versus budget? Because I don't think that formally goes anywhere at the moment. Maybe go to strategy and planning, but I don't
Supposed to, yeah.
on a regular basis, so forecast versus...
No, only when the project...
I see that is in the pack
up.
that goes to the finance committee,
Yeah.
but
Okay,
I mean
so
it's
if-
pretty much the same every year, which is not very much is spent, but it's always going to be at the last minute, and then it always is.
Well, I'm not
Okay.
thinking so much on an annual basis, I'm thinking on a project basis, so that allows us to have more visibility of total project spend, you know, London Estates, for example. Specifically not on an annual basis, actually, lifetime spend. So perhaps it's something we could think about.
Okay. Any other points on this finance report? Can we note it? Sorry, Tricia.
Just two quick votes, actually. So just on things that other people have said. So on Steph's question around which is better, promptness or going via the right escalation, I would vote for promptness this year in particular. So that one. And then I didn't want to lose, I thought Andy's really important point, which is that this is a really good information pack, and it could be even better with a little bit of commentary. So just a few words to say to help us, to point us in the right direction of which numbers to look at. So I very much agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, if I go back to what I've seen as best practice elsewhere, you would produce a simple quadrant report. What happened in the period? What's the trend? What's it telling us? What we're doing about it? And that's the way I ran all the businesses that I had, and people understand what's expected then. Now, I'm not saying, you know, reconstitute things here, but we talk about it's a lot of work to do it. These are the top level tabulations that will come out from every period's report. It's not extra. This, I hope, is what Feb get to see.
Yeah, so just on that, and I had noted it as something we're committed to as part of Sarah's additional information anyway, but from Q1 you will see that in the expenditure reporting, you will see the commentary in there, so great.
Good, thanks.
Anybody else? Any other comments on this? Can we take that as noted then? Thank you very much. The item 8 in your pack, disruption, that's been delayed a bit because Sean is joining us at some time.
He's disrupted.
Yeah, it's been disrupted, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's less than 90 minutes.
I don't understand irony.
Sean will be here, later on. So I can't remember what time it was delayed to 1.
1 o'clock is the working time, yeah. So we'll turn to that later. So in the meantime, can I turn your attention to what is listed as item 9, the annual report and accounts. At this point, I should say that members in a session have already crawled over this to a large extent, so this is not new to members and it's not new to all of us, and a lot of work has been done in terms of querying. Who wants to take this?
Rubila wants to, I think.
Rubila?
I was going to kind of say something similar. So obviously we had a walkthrough yesterday that members attended where we went through each section in the annual report explaining kind of what the section was trying to trying to do. And we also went through with Harriet the salient points in the accounts and also the audit adjustments that had taken place since the draft set of the annual report accounts, which you have received today, and that was the same set that went to the AWAC as well. We answered questions from the members. The audit is ongoing, but NAO and KPMG have indicated that they do believe the work will be completed by next week. We will then take the annual report and accounts to an additional AWAC. There's a specific AWAC to approve them on 5th of July, and we'll present all the changes since the AWAC authority version to the version that we're taking on 5th of July to allow AWAC to easily see the changes, because we won't necessarily be able to get you the latest set of accounts a week beforehand, which we would ordinarily do for papers, because we want to make sure that we have all the changes in there as far as possible. But we will do a clear paper showing all the changes just beforehand for AWAC.
Can I ask, Rabula, have you had any indication from the Department for Transport that they will not shift the submission dates or the plan laying before Parliament?
So everyone, be it through DFT, NAO, etc., have been told to continue as expected, and there'll be further information after the election. There'll be further information, but everyone has to be told to just continue as expected.
Thank you. Any questions or points for Rabula, Nick?
Yeah, this is the third time I've seen this, and I'm one of those members who doesn't get exposure to financial meetings because I'm not on Craig or Kenna's committees. Just a comment really, Ron, and a thank you. This feels much smoother than it's done in the previous 2 years, and I'd like to, observe that somebody has gripped the auditors, which was causing us angst last year, and it just seems like a good process. So I'll leave it to others to say how good the number crunching is, but in terms of the governance and the presenting it to members in a timely fashion, I'd just like to say that I think it's a massive step forward from where we were last year.
Thank you very much, Nick. Anybody else? Anything? I will at this point, on behalf of members, say publicly, I'd also be joined by Harriet from the Force Finance team. Both the staff at the executive and the Force have worked very hard and very well together to get us across the line, and I pick up on what Nick said about good governance surrounding this, so you can pat your teams on the back. Thank you very much for a job well done. Are we content then to note the annual report and accounts? Thank you very much indeed. Item 10, Board Effectiveness Review.
Thank you, Chair. That's myself. So this paper builds on the workshop that members had on the 21st of May. So I present to you today the action plan arising from that, and I'll take any questions or comments.
Okay, you've seen the paper in the pack. Colleagues, does anybody have any points they wish to raise or questions they wish to ask of Alistair?
Very good paper.
The membership has been involved to a great extent in the development of this, and I think we've reached a good stage with this now, and it's something that we have to work with every year to make sure we try and improve and increase the effectiveness of our governance. So if there are no questions or points.
I would say, so I do think it's a good bit of work, and I'm grateful to Alistair and colleagues for doing it. Speaking personally, and it may be true that I'm speaking to some members as well, when you end up with a grid with actions on it, it's sometimes sucks the life out of an initiative a bit. So it's up to us to keep this alive and show people that this is a meaningful exercise, which it is. And you will note towards the end of the paper that we must submit this to the Department for Transport, because they expect every year that we scrutinise ourselves to make sure that we are improving as a board. So what I was going to say, Ron, was I believe that will be more important this year than many years. Because, yes, there will probably be a new government that needs to form a view on how this particular arm's length body is working alongside many others. But B, just much more tactically, we've got an entirely new sponsor team as well. So entirely new officials who know nothing about us and will need to see that we are able to scrutinise ourselves and offer a candid assessment of ourselves and how we can improve. So it is more important this year, and we will be taking the juice of this and feeding it into the department. New sponsor team.
Willie, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Ron. reading the paper, it caused me to reflect on the difference, perhaps some of the new members and some of the more elder state members, shall we say, in terms of how they answered the questions. And I suspect the elder state members, we become conditioned sometimes to papers, performance, governance, and it's helpful, I think, when we bring in the new members who bring different experiences and call things out for what they are. So I think it was a good process this time, and it was good to do it after all the new members joined, because I think it helped the process and helped improve what we do.
Thanks very much. Anybody else, any points or questions they wish to raise? Yes,
it's a very good and comprehensive piece of work. There's an awful lot of actions in there. Obviously, we need to be involved in many of those. Some of those, I guess, are you to lead, Alistair, but I presume it will be made clear to us in good time when you need us to do things, because I'd hate the whole of the board effectiveness plan effectively to land on the lap of the chief executive and the board secretary. It's meant to be our effectiveness plan. So how do we share the work around, I guess, is my question.
I wonder, sorry, Tricia, you want to...
Oh, just to kind of agree with that and build on it. And I think there's 30, first, it is a really good piece of work. It's so clear and structured, so thank you. The 30 recommendations, 30 actions they're apples and pears, and some of them will be more kind of absolutely key to operating in a different way than some of the others. So I'm just picking up on Kenna's point, whether you want to direct us towards a smaller subset of them that you think are going to be the most important and where member help can be the most useful, and really make sure that we're putting our time into those. Because if we try and spread ourselves across all 30, then we may risk not getting as much done as we might.
Picking up on what Hugh has said, given the context of this and the comments that colleagues have helpfully made, I think there certainly, at the very least, we will require an updated report on this at every authority meeting so that we know what is happening in terms of progress against these. And in terms of, like any variance analysis, Alistair, we need to be updated if something's going awry or has become out of date or needs to change, and we can do that in some sort of interim way, not necessarily waiting for an authority meeting. But we need to keep on top of this one to demonstrate both that we are trying to improve as a board and that we can keep the department informed of progress on all of these things. Any other comments or questions, colleagues? Okay, thank you. Paper is approved. Thank you. And now the Code of Governance refresh. Again, this is you, Alistair.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members and those with packs have got the summary of the changes we're proposing to make to the code. The code itself is in the background pack with track changes. So the paper is presented to members for approval. And I'll hand over to Rabila, who might want to draw out any of the substantive changes to the annexes.
So I'm not sure if there's anything necessarily if there's anything substantive to draw out. I mean, we did go through the changes with Steph and her team before submitting it to make sure that they were content with the changes that we're proposing. So we added some information in around the new pensions group. We added some information around how the Steph's role and this role should work together, and that will be kind of come clearer over the next few weeks as well. And we added some work, some extra delegations into Annex 7 as well, which included giving some income delegation to the force for the first time. So normally all income has to come to BTPA. What we're doing now is giving some income delegation to the force and see how that works. Obviously that can be come back to later to see how that's actually kind of worked. And then just a lot of it was just around clarifying, I think, because there were times during the year when maybe there were different interpretations around delegations, so we were just trying to put some clarification in, putting examples in, so hopefully that works a bit better in terms of how we work together.
Thanks, Rabila. Anyone, any questions or points?
I might add only, this comes every year. We have a look at a code of governance. I would say this is, with a possible exception of last year actually, this is the most changes we've made since I've been here in 5 years. in addition to the points that Rabila made, and there are some around the detailed delegations which she has discussed with Steph before, we've been through it to try and make it shorter. One of the things that I had found, and I try to put myself in a position of new members, is that it's actually quite a formidable document if you're trying to eat it all at once. So there are bits that are repetitive and we can take them out, and so it's still not no one would describe it as a short document, but there are efforts to take bits out that are repetitive, not needed in this space. And then the second thing, maybe just to highlight, as Rabila said, we did take out last year the requirement for a protocol between the treasurer of the BTP fund and the COG equivalent in terms of how finances would work and financial oversight should work between the authority and the force. That part of the suggested changes that we had made last year from Deloitte, we took that out, but on reflection we decided to put that back in. We have got I don't know if it's unique, but we've certainly got our own act, haven't we? We've got a unique arrangement around accounting officer, additional accounting officer, how financial oversight should work. So we've put back in the requirement to have a protocol, and that is what we hope over the course of the next month or so, with Kenneth's help, we will agree together. But that's quite a significant re-entry that I wanted to draw out. Otherwise, there's some detail on the delegations that Rabila has referred to, and then there is a shortening of the document. More surgery this year than we have done in previous years.
Rabila, you wanted to add something?
I'm just going to add that for those members who were here last year, you'll remember that we increased the capital projects delegation limits for the Chief Constable, the Chief Exec, and what then went to full authority. We did say last year that we would see how that went during the year and then come back and give the full authority and an opinion about how that has worked. And we have done that thinking during the year, looking back at what's happened, and our opinion is that I think it's working quite well. There's no issues that we need to report to the authority.
Thank you, Rabila. Any questions or points from colleagues? Tricia?
I'm always slightly embarrassed to say this, but I was wondering, just because it's such a picky drafting point, but at paragraph 225 on the strategic risk register, there's some new text which says at least annually this should be reviewed in detail by members and refreshed as necessary. Now, when I read that, I just wondered whether if we're doing this, it's an opportunity to be a bit more pointy about what we're doing on. So you could read that as being, let's look at the list and see if it's still the right list. Whereas in the conversations that we've had, actually what we're trying to do in those more than annual conversations is to test ourselves on whether the risk identifications are right, whether the scoring is right, and whether the action plans are having the impact that they're supposed to. And I just wonder if we're refreshing this document, we might want to hold ourselves to account to a bit more specifics on what we're doing.
Good point. Can we look at that? Thanks, Rabila. Anybody else? We can tend to approve this. If you've got any subsequent comments. Sorry, Paul, I didn't see you.
Yeah, well, if we're going picky drafting points. Thank you for sending through the Code of Governance, which I thought was a really interesting read, and I did read it. And then I wanted to make a suggestion in relation to, let me find the right page now, I think it's page 35, which is under the responsibilities of the police authorities. Just check I've got the right page. It's page 11. And it's really going back to the point you were talking about, Steph, in terms of what sort of information do we need and when do we need it. So there's 49F, talks about management information, ensuring clear, consistent performance information. And for me, I'd like that to say clear, consistent, concise and timely.
Yes, I don't see any problem with that at all, because we've said earlier, timely information is probably the be-all and end-all in terms of this.
But I think concise is important as well. This is not screeds of information. This is short, sharp, please.
Okay, anybody else? Anything? Can we then approve those changes, but subject to any further work that's being done? And if any of you have any light bulb moments, I would ask that you inform Alistair, and we can take those into consideration. Okay, thank you very much.
So next, Chair, we have 11.2.
Yeah.
So this is regarding the respective committee terms of references. So the paper before members has 2 appendices with proposed amendments to Strategy Committee and to People Committee. There's also a commitment to give you a verbal update on any proposed amendments from the Appointments Committee. There are none. However, Audit Committee that met on Friday would like to propose insertion of some wording around its remit over functional standards into its terms of reference. So taking the paper as read with that additional comment from Audit Committee, it's to members for approval, please.
The changes are relatively minor, but does anybody have any comments or points? So the chairs of the relevant committees want to say anything? We all happy?
Biggest change, but we were happy with them. So.
That's fine, Alistair. You've got that.
Thank you.
To go.
Still got Alistair on a roll, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
we'll get a medal out of this, Alistair.
Item 12, again, I've got the paper as read. This relates to repurposing the stakeholder engagement working group back to being a policing plan working group in anticipation of the substantive 3-year refresh of the policing plan.
That's normal. Does anybody have any points? Abdul?
So if we're saying that stakeholder engagement is still a priority, which obviously it is, surely could we not have the name stakeholder engagement as part of the name of the working group?
So there is reference within the terms of reference to some stakeholder engagement, but I'll leave that open to members if that's enough.
Any views? Okay, but this is something we do every year. It morphs into, because the policing plan. Yeah. Sorry.
Kate's got a view.
Kate.
Hello, thank you. Just to say, I think we need to grip this through the deep dive of the partnership working group risk, because I do think we're not doing necessarily as much as we could do or need to do collectively on strategic stakeholder engagement. Excuse me.
Okay.
I think this is an answer to Abdul's question, but I would say it's, we have got to do more detailed look at a policing plan for next year under Willie's stewardship, and definitely a part of that is about how we engage stakeholders through that process. But that exercise is not going to eat the whole elephant of stakeholder engagement.
No.
So so there's more to stakeholder engagement than just that group, and I think that's why we've said this is not the group that's solving stakeholder engagement, because that's a large endeavour which may forget to do the policing plan, if you see what I mean. But the core focus of that group is we need to produce a policing plan. Anyway, just repeating myself, but that's why.
So I get that point. So I think we need to do a bit more work around, and I think that's acknowledged.
Deep dive. Yeah. We content to morph the committee, as it were?
Yes.
Yep. Thank you very much. Now, my piece of paper says we're supposed to have lunch now, but I think we're racing through this agenda to some extent, so we're ahead of ourselves. And we missed out an agenda item. So I propose we carry on for a bit. And can we take your report, Lucy? Would that be okay?
Can do, yeah. Right, let me just pull the forms up. Okay, so I probably wanted to start by saying this is the first full authority meeting since my contract has been extended. So I wanted to really say how excited and proud I am to be given the opportunity. And it's real thanks to all members for your ongoing support and encouragement in this role, which can be a lonely role sometimes, but I'm thoroughly enjoying myself. This report, it's just probably more for newer members, but this report is in a different format to the usual reports that I give, and that fulfils our responsibilities under the Railway and Transport Safety Act 2003 to publish an annual report, and it's something we brought in as a change. I think it was last year or the year before. It's a detailed report, so I'm quite happy to take any questions, but I thought probably in the interest of time, although we do seem to have quite a bit of time, but I thought I'd pull out some of the key areas. So the first area I probably wanted to focus on is in relation to demand. And I think, you've probably got a bit of an overview of this from the performance data, but it's clear that demand is continuing to increase in the force, and we don't see that as ending anytime soon, and that's right the way through from some of the incidents that are, causes in relation to disruption, right the way through to our crime demand, our need for investigations, that's continuing to grow. I suppose a point of relevance is that the footfall has reached the highest level since the pandemic, so it's definitely growing. And of course, we're cognizant of the desire of industry to grow that footfall even more, and we see ourselves as playing a part in terms of the recovery and the continued recovery of the railway. Without going over the performance data again, emphasising the point that the railway is a very safe environment. The chances of being a victim of crime on the railway are very low, but we have seen a 20% increase in notifiable offences, a 20% increase in violence against women and girls, and a 10% increase in sexual offences. And part of this, as I touched on earlier, is I think the accessibility, which I feel really proud of. It's really important that if you are a victim, your ability to access policing, us, and tell us that you have been a victim or you've witnessed an offence is really important. And in some of our crimes now, you may well have seen, I don't know whether it was circulated, but Paul Fennell at the Home Affairs Select Committee, really talking about some of the good practice that we're doing in terms of the reach out to women and girls and bystanders in terms of reporting, and we will, I think we're the first force to take reports from victims where you don't actually have to give your name in terms of reporting. So for me, lots of positives there. Coupled with our campaigns, we like to be different with our campaigns, and we have had some really good support from industry. I think particularly London Underground, the campaign that has gone out on London Underground, I've certainly received a lot of positive feedback about talking about the things that people have probably been a bit shy in discussing previously. And I think it's a sign of a confident police force that we are willing to step in the arena and have those discussions as part of our campaigns. We are solving more crimes than ever, but a priority for COG this year is to continue to drive down crime, particularly focusing on the high harm offences, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And in relation to disruption, demand continues to increase for all the reasons that we talked about. I think for us, the partnership working, particularly in this space of suicide, and suicide prevention is really super important, and Charlie leads on that work nationally for us across policing, but also leads for the force in terms of the work that network policing are doing at the moment in terms of the preventative work. I am pleased with the work, the progress on our transformation programme. I mean, over the last couple of years, we've presented a very ambitious transformation programme, and members rightly have in the past said to me, are you sure you can deliver this? We are continuing to deliver and work at pace, and it is a real mobilisation of everybody in the force in order to deliver on that transformation work. And we delivered £4 million worth of cashable savings last year. Our move to Buckingham Palace Road is of real critical importance for us this year, and Steph is definitely gripping that and working with some key members in relation to our move, and I think that will be a flagship for us. And certainly, I think in terms of our presence within the Westminster sort of landscape near Victoria is welcomed by a lot of people. And certainly I think that it will be a way of us driving our operational activity by moving people into that location. So we're feeling super positive in relation to that. I don't talk about it as an HQ. It's not an HQ. It is the London hub, and I think that's really important that we're very clear about that, because we don't have an HQ. People often say to me, where's your office? And I always say it's wherever I want it to be to deal with what I need to deal with at that point in time. We are very determined, I know I mentioned it earlier, but we're really determined around the drones project. That's been quite difficult to get off the ground, so to speak. But it has been quite difficult, not least because the business case really makes, it speaks for itself. And, I know, Willie, you've talked about that before. It really does make a very clear economic business case, but it has been very difficult to secure the funding in terms of to kickstart the programme. So you may well recall that we made some conscious decisions with our budget this year, which has not been to invest in some of the refurbishment work that we needed to do with one of our hubs up in Manchester for our firearms officers. We did have a conversation with them and explain why we were not using the capital for this year, and we've prioritised that into the drones programme. So We're hoping that we'll make some pace, and we definitely think that that will have a seismic impact in terms of our speed of dealing with disruption, particularly in relation to that joint decision making that we need to progress quickly with industry. I wanted to probably take a moment to reflect on Operation Overhand. So this was the protests which were as a result of the Gaza-Israel conflict, and I'm very proud of the progress that we made in our response to dealing with the protests, which was very, very tricky, under a lot of scrutiny from lots of people with different interests. And I think the key part for the force was to have a proportionate policing response that was within the legislative framework that was available in order to police it. And you'll see in the fuller report, I have reflected on one of the recent cases which we didn't get a conviction in relation to it, and it is linked more broadly with some of the High Court decisions around some of the other protests. And I think particularly relevant for BTP is the point around what constitutes serious disruption. And we are in discussions with DFT and with the Home Office to understand what the result of the court case means and whether or not we need to have any legislative change moving forward. But obviously that's all on a bit of a pause at the moment until after the election. Another area I wanted to reflect on, which for me is a huge positive, we've been very clear that we want to deliver cultural reform, we want to empower our people, and we want to be a modern and inclusive workplace, which includes, make sure that we hear from our people about what matters most to them. And the All People survey, we got a 65% in response to the survey, which I've put some of the benchmarks into my full report, and I think we certainly feel very proud as an organisation that we did get that 65% response. And we certainly have made some changes over the last year in the force, which directly are a result of some of the feedback from the All People survey. This year we're hoping to get the balance of, what we need to change is also what we need to keep. And I do keep saying to people, you need to let us know what works, what's working in order to aid you to do your job, the job that I'm asking them to do as effectively as they possibly can, because it's important to know some of those areas that are working very well. But much of the change, I would say, that we've brought in over the last year has been around positive feedback from our people. So the key challenges this year, to summarise, and then happy to take any questions from the paper. So maintaining our professional standards. We have invested a lot of money in relation to our uplift for our professional standards. There's some really good statistics in terms of the benefits of that investment. I think, for me, professional standards is very much linked to our legitimacy as a police force, and it's really important that we maintain those. Our investment in technology, as Andy knows, he's been close to it and very supportive as a member. Our capital budget is tight. A lot of it will be going on just cyclical replacement. But for us to make sure that we are safe and secure, particularly from the cyber threat that continues to grow, our focus on technology is really important. And certainly, when I look at the improvement in the equipment that our people have got to do their job, it's been a pretty seismic change over the last couple of years. So making sure that we are still in a good place to be able to invest in our technology is really important. And looking how we can use technology to help us to deliver a better service, and then thinking about that balance between the investment in technology and the people that are required and where we settle. Obviously, the optimised policing model will be looking at our structure. I think other challenges for us are enhancing the integrated security pilot. If we look, we've always said around about £1 billion a year is spent in security across the railway network. I personally think that we could do that 10 to 20% cheaper if we did that in a more collaborative and integrated way with industry. And we have made very, very small progress, and we need to really step that up over the next couple of years. We will look to discuss that once post-election in terms of an opportunity to do better for less financial investment. The other bit is, if I look at the manifestos of political parties, I think the Police Uplift programme, I wouldn't want members to forget the challenge that the Police Uplift programme presented to BTP historically. We were excluded from that Police Uplift programme of the 20,000. There was a whole industry that was put in place from the Home Office and also from the College of Policing in terms of recruitment, and it was very difficult for BTP to compete in that space. So, I think all parties have a desire to increase to some degree policing numbers, and that's likely to put us back into this competitive process in terms of recruitment going forward, and also retention. And the retention, because obviously in terms of, we are slightly different, I would say, to Home Office forces. We compete not just against Home Office forces to showcase why you should come and be a cop, particularly in BTP, but we are also have got the retention issue as the railway tries to recruit some of our serving officers and staff into the railway. So we have two competitors that we have to deal with in terms of recruitment and retention. So I'm not clear on what the current position is likely to be, but I do think that is a risk area for us and for members, that we need to be very clear on what our plan is as we move into the future. And I suppose what bleeds into that is around concessionary travel. And it's really, for me, my position is very much that I would like to level BTP up with the rest of industry, the railway industry, in terms of the concessionary travel that's available. So that is around the 75% uplift, 75% discount for everybody, and then I think the additional 25%, which is the 100% free travel for officers, reflects the fact that they've got warranted powers and are able to deal with things. And certainly for me, it is very much linked into that recruitment and retention issue. Probably one thing I would just wonder as we move forward is, my tenure and the strategic plan are slightly misaligned. So I do think that as we go forward, probably not for this committee, but there is something about looking at the timings of the strategic plan, whether or not we do a refresh this year and then look to make sure that we land our new plan for the year after, which I think could be a suggestion that I would ask the relevant committee to consider. So I probably would want to finish by saying I do feel very privileged to lead BTP, to be entrusted to lead an organisation of 5,000 people that's in the business of protecting the public is really important, and I never underestimate the gravitas of the role in terms of making sure that we are protecting the travelling public. There is a lot more work to be done, and I'm looking forward very much to working with members in order to deliver that work over the next few years. So thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Before I throw it open, Stuart, you've got your hand up. Welcome.
Thanks, Ron. Just very briefly, two things. One is I think the format of the report is excellent and it's very easy to read, and it's a very full and comprehensive report, and well done to everyone that prepared it, because I know these things take a huge amount of work, even though the presentation is often a lot shorter. I just wanted to reflect or pose a question with respect to the concessionary fares issue, because we did have a very good discussion of people and culture, and I think we got a very good, strong consensus. Obviously, there's going to be a new minister in post, a transport minister, end of next week or the week after. Have we got a proactive plan for putting options to the private office of the Secretary of State or the Rail Minister on the issue of concessionary fares? Because obviously we've done a lot of work and preparatory stuff on it over the last year or so. We're in a good position to make the case, and it seems to me we need to be very much on the front foot and proactive to get a decision quickly, given the wider context you rightly say about recruiting people and non-pay issues, which may make it easier for us to recruit the right people.
You want to take that?
Well, I think there's a couple of elements to that. I would say to the private secretary on the first day, on the 5th of July, no. Is the short answer.
Yeah.
I mean, there is.
I was being optimistic.
Yeah. So we've got to talk about I mean, Lucy and I do agree with the language on this. So how it's accounted for. So the department has asked us how will these things be accounted for, and the authority should have a chance to decide that. We haven't done that. No reason it can't be done in correspondence. It might not be that complicated, but that's quite a big piece for us as an authority, which we won't have ready by the 5th of July, I think.
Anything, before I open this more widely on Lucy's report, anything else on that particular issue anybody wants to say? I think the short answer to the question is it's plodding along there, Stuart. We recognise the importance of it. There has been correspondence with the department about how it might be costed and funded, and we will continue to plug away at it to see what we can get. And I recognise that we should get into new ministers as early as possible with this, so it's not a lack of effort or...
We might, well, if I may suggest, if it's possible to take any soundings in the DFT and the Treasury as to how this might be received, that would give us an advantage as we go forward. I mean, obviously, I didn't really mean the 5th of July. I think I've heard fish to fry. But certainly, the point I'm making is that it needs to be a well enunciated, coherent argument early on in the government to have a chance of landing well, I guess is what I'm saying.
Thanks, Stuart. Thank you. Now, turning to the main report, this, as you know, is a statutory report by the Chief Constable. Are there any points or questions in relation to what she said? Andy and then Tricia.
4 points, but they won't take long. I think there's a drafting point on para 8.1 where you talk about in my last report, which is probably something that's drifted in. Your comments on the ISSP, I absolutely endorse, because we just know, don't we?
Sorry, there's some background noise there.
Stuart?
We know we're going to be asked for savings. It's just inevitable, isn't it? There's not going to be much money to go around. And if you remember when we started off on this project, when Alan got involved, the objective was to tackle that £1 billion that you mentioned again. And we've done all the nice stuff very effectively, and Alan takes credit for that quite rightly. But the hard bit, which is how do we not have as many bodies involved and how do we save some money, we really do need to put some energy behind, because it's probably, given that 85% of our cost of staff, it's probably the one, and some of it will come from industry then and contracts, the one where there's probably most to go at. So I just echo your thoughts on that important one. Third point, when I read the report, I'd never heard of Project Falcon. And the issues around drones, we've had loads and loads and loads of discussion. I would simply love it if we could have a paper that pulled it all together, that came to the authorities, so we all kind of understood all the ramifications. I mean, I went to Rail Live last week and talked to the two officers who were there who do a lot of the training, and I learnt things there that I'd sort of not really picked up. And I think there's great work going on. I would just like to see it in 3 pages so we all understood, if that's possible. And the last point really is without going down a rabbit hole, on 214 where you talk about this, because Cass is on 61016, which fantastic, and you mentioned it earlier, and the fact that one of the network providers is thinking that should now be free, that's utterly brilliant. Because if you think of the efforts we put in with people like the FA trying to get a third party to support us, and it's just an never-ending problem, to get the mobile phone companies in is just brilliant. But what it reminded me of, and as I say, I don't want to go off down a rabbit hole, when we talk of this sort of technology and improvement, when I went on a control visit the other day, I was absolutely horrified to learn the amount of physical rekeying necessary in B Division between the Met and ourselves in the way we manage things in real time. Now, I know that's kind of our problem, but they need to solve it. But I was completely, shocked by that, and you will know it, but it was complete news to me. The amount of physical rekeying that has to be done by officers in control is just staggering. So if we want to take something to the Home Office, for Christ's sake, we ought to take that. Sorry, I mean, it came out to me really on the success on there on 214. That's my bits, thanks. Great report.
Yes, thanks. Well, thank you. Project Falcon might be tricky on 3 pages, but we definitely can. I mean, there's 2 bits to the drones. Just quickly. So you've got business as usual that we're doing stuff on drones now, and Project Falcon is more about we want to be able to fly beyond visual line of sight. So it's very specific in terms of what it's trying to achieve. So we've got some very talented people that we've brought in to lead that project, and I think probably if you give us another 4 or 5 weeks, I think we're in a good position to then give you a presentation, maybe at one of the breakfast briefings, and then give you a supporting note on that. So that would be helpful.
Thanks.
The network providers. So this was quite an interesting one for me because probably slightly to criticise myself, I wasn't aware that you actually had to pay for the service because I just thought it was a bit of a no-brainer that why would you need to pay for that as a service. One provider was already doing that, which is our provider, and was providing it free, and the others were charging. So actually, in the stakeholder team, somebody gripped it, and we wrote a letter, and very quickly one of the providers came back and said that they just removed the cost. So we're just waiting for 2 other providers to come back. But I think it's a very quick time piece of work, and in fact was raised to me by a member of the public at a function that I was at that they'd had to pay. And I think if you look at it, the main issue was very much if you've run out of credit, you can't, and that was really difficult. Yeah. So I'm very pleased with the work that took place by the team in relation to that. And yeah, the ISP, I do think we're all in the same page over that, but it's really we've got to push forward and get the interest and be able to demonstrate the benefit. I still think that the paper that was completed by Kate with support from people in the force is a very valid paper.
Well, perhaps it needs to be updated and refreshed for the new government, whichever party forms that government.
And just in answer to your question about technology, Andy, and double keying, then forces on the same systems, then there is direct exchange incident transfer, so we can do that without any double keying. The issue is that there are so many proprietary systems out there for command and control, and there's no mandation. So actually, and the Met are actually a sort of step beyond that. So they've got their own sort of system. So yeah, it's difficult. We have tried many times to sort of bridge the technology across those different organisation types, but unsurprisingly, suppliers are unwilling to allow competitors access to the back end of their systems because of the commercial sensitivities of that. So, arguably that's where our challenge lies.
Probably. It seemed to me it's just for security reasons they say you can't copy and paste. That's the thing you can't do. I'm sorry, that sounds like a red herring, but if half our crime is in London and we take everything through the Met, where 999 is run, you think, crikey, how difficult can we make it? But thank you.
Tricia.
A different kind of question, really, although I do very much agree about ISSP, and I think there's going to be a real premium on bold, structural rationalisation, which can deliver efficiency. I think that's going to be so important, but that wasn't what I was going to ask. So, I really liked your report, and I really liked the way you presented it. And sometimes these reports can be a bit impersonal and corporate. And what I really heard when I was reading it was your personal voice, Lucy, which was really, really great. So in that vein, and because the way that you started this was talking about extension, I thought I might just ask a sort of reflective question, which is, as you kind of approach what you would describe as a second term, where you're a politician, but obviously you're not. Are there any reflections that you're willing to share with us as a group about what you found in your first term, what you learned, and what you might do differently in the next period of your chiefness?
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
How long you got?
What a great team you've got.
We finished today, Lucy.
Yeah, and actually, Tricia, that probably prompts me to think that there are some members still in the room that did get my presentation initially on what I had found when I came in, which is probably still quite valid. So there might be a time where it's worth me representing that, actually. But I would say when I came into the force, it was a force that needed to re-establish its identity. It needed to grow in confidence in terms of its decision making and probably be bolder. You know, the point that you've talked about, the ISP, you know, if you tinker around the edges, you don't actually get quite a significant change. But a force that has got a big heart. It's a really kind force. And I remember when I first started, and Steph in her previous role, I kept describing it to people as kind, and people would almost like come back to me and say, what do you mean by kind? But it does very much care about what it delivers, and it takes a lot of pride in its performance. Definitely, I think, was very progressive in some of its thinking around violence against women and girls. You know, quite advanced in its thinking, which was really good. And I suppose what I found is a real willingness to change and to be quite ambitious. And you know, part of my decision making around, you know, going into a second term is, you know, there's lots of things that you consider, isn't it? You know, and it's the confidence of the authority, the investment. You know, I mean, you know, if I look at some of my peers across the country, you know, they're in a very financially unstable position. So it's very difficult to be able to deliver against their strategy, almost impossible in some areas. And I think, you know, we had a good, you know, financial settlement, you know, based against the, you know, capacity planning tool, and again, all designed internally. So I think people who take time to do things and to do things well. I would say we've probably spent the last 3 years building some pretty solid foundations and sorting out some things that have been a challenge for a long time, and we've rectified some of those. We've listened to our people, we've listened to industry in terms of what matters. I think the challenge now going forward is the sort of greater innovation, you know, some difficult choices that we've got when we come forward. You know, how do we draw forward technological advancements? In my pitch for this role, I talked about being a force that's enabled by data to make good choices, and, you know, digitally enabled security, you know, for me is the prize here, about how we can use sort of technology and data in a way to create a safer environment for those who live and work on the industry. And I think, you know, I'm quite excited about going forward, because I think we've got some solid foundations. You know, we couldn't have even been discussing technology when I started, because we had got very poor systems and processes, whereas I think now we're in a much better position. And I think I find myself 3 years down the line a force that is making choices and making recommendations which are evidence-based. And for me, that's quite exciting, because we can be bolder in our ambition going forward. And I suppose the final bit for me, without prolonging it too much, but I have to say that one of the things I'm really proud of is the force's turnaround in terms of professional standards. You know, we now, you know, you have a force, I have a force, which, you know, has seen over a 75% increase in people calling out poor behaviour. And I think for the legitimacy of policing going forward, that's really, really impressive. And we've made choices to invest money and disinvest somewhere else, because we recognise that having the right people in policing, you know, police staff or police officers is really important. So I am excited for the future. I definitely wasn't ready to leave, because I think we've, you know, tidied up a lot of things and built some really strong foundations, and now there's an opportunity to take BTP to the next level, supported by a great team of people. I got that in, shall I?
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Right, on to the report.
Just a quick one for me. Thank you for the report. It obviously fulfills a different requirement to the BTPA's annual report and accounts, but has the BTPA report been able to take your report effectively? Because in the areas of performance and assurance, there is obviously a lot of overlap there. So I guess a question to Rabila, have you been able to take the Chief's report and simply build it in with a bit of an overlay, or have we had two parallel streams? It's just an efficiency question, really.
I think this is the inefficiency of the Act. Sorry, Rabila, go ahead, please.
Sorry. So in some ways it does feel quite parallel, because our annual report accounts, we have to do ours a lot earlier. We have to start the process, etc., because ours is audited. However, we receive a lot of the inputs for the annual report from the force, and so we are reliant on the force kind of bringing the same information to both our report, the annual report accounts, and the Chief's annual report.
So are there any efficiencies that could be gained for a future year?
think that's probably a question for maybe myself, Lindsay and Mel to think about at some point, but potentially.
Thank you.
We'll take that away and have a look, actually, Ken. I think it's a good point.
Thank you very much for the report. Like Tricia, I really enjoyed reading it and got a real sense of the author from it. I also got a really clear sense of where the force is aiming to be the best in class because it's a police force, and where it is different. And there's definitely that strong sense of wanting to drive forward technology to be different and being prepared to have a trailblazing role in illustrating where technology can be used. And I wonder if that's something you could push harder in terms of some of the challenges you've talked about for people. Because I think it's really attractive to say this is a force where actually we're employing drone pilots, we're employing data science. You know, it's a modern organisation that sees how you can bring new people into policing and make it better. And I think that's an opportunity you could kind of push on, because it's sort of implicit in your report, but it's not explicit.
No, I agree with you entirely, and I think we should be talking about sort of people who are crime fighters, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a warrant card. So, you know, we've very much been having that conversation within the force, and I do think that we don't have to be politicised around officer numbers. What we should be is pushing the boundaries to be judged on the impact of the way we deliver. And I think, you know, if Rachel was here, she would very much talk about, you know, the landscape for recruitment. You need a varied offer. And I don't see a future where you have to have a warrant card to be flying a drone, you know. And I think, but I it's helpful feedback actually, because we can be stronger on that. We need to probably push a bit quicker.
Nick,
I'm going to adopt and endorse everything colleagues have said about the report. I found it very easy to read, and it pulled together things I've learnt over the last 2.5 years. Can I go back to the ISPP? And I don't want to sound a discordant note, but I think we've got to stop talking about pilot, because we've been talking about it all the while I've been a member. And for me, pilots have, not the ones that fly drones, you know, pilots as in testing things out, have a limited shelf life, and then they either have to become business as usual or they get binned. And we've evaluated it, and I read it with great interest, because it's a question I've asked a number of times at different meetings: when's this going to become business as usual? Because it's a great product. That's my starting point. So you look at your section 6, and by the time I've got to 6.5, I've got umpteen different variations on a theme of what's going on in what is basically joint working. And I suppose my ask and my suggestion is one and the same thing, is as we are inevitably getting a change of rail minister, because he's not going to be an MP, whatever the colour they are, it seems to me we've got a package that answers some of the inevitable questions we're going to be asked about efficiencies. And have you got a view, has the force got a view on which is the best model? Because it seems to me that it's inherently inefficient to have different models around the country, because one must be more efficient in terms of outputs and results, and one must be more cost effective. And in an era where costs are going to be really critical, and no doubt at some time in the future there'll be rubbing points between the force and the executive, the force and the authority about how much can you spend. This to me seems like the big win. This and drones seem to be the you know, one for disruption and one for efficiency.
Yeah, so I think there's almost like there's a helpful opportunity with Charlie moving over into the network policing role to do a bit of a sort of foot on the ball moment. And, you know, we've got all of this, but how are we going to move it forward? And, you know, for me, it's really important that we aren't just like tinkering at the edges. So, you know, there is some really good work in here that I've reflected in the report, but we need to do this on a more industrial scale. And I think the discussions that Charlie and I have had last week is, you know, what exactly have we got, and what is it that we will be saying if we want to, you know, our prize is to say, let's deliver security through a single guiding mind. You know, to whoever the minister is, this is a single guiding mind, and we think you can take 10 or 20% out of the cost of it, and this is the way that it needs to be delivered. And I think there is still a little bit of work to do. So there's some really good practice, but for me it's not quite at the level that we're ready to say, and this is how it would work. We need, it is difficult to deal with industry. They're not one whole group, and that's one of our biggest challenges, which is why you get the difference across the areas, because you get a greater appetite from potentially one TOC than another, different approach from parts of Network Rail. So certainly, Charlie's focus at the moment is to see what we've got, pull that together, and be ready to say, this is what we believe, and this is what we think are some of the solutions. And some of those are very high level, because we're not going to do it by just picking off individual TOCs in different parts of the country. We need a single, policy position really through government in order to deliver this. But I think it is the prize for industry.
And if it's helpful, Nick, I think that my assessment of the 5 sites, initial sites, was they've all developed organically. And I think that's largely been as a consequence of the nature of those partnerships. Some operators have more appetite than others to allow us to push into that space, and at some places we have more appetite to allow operators to push more into the security space. I think inevitably the £1 billion that we're talking is the whole pie. So essentially a lot of that money sits in industry, it doesn't sit in policing. There is, I think, a natural reluctance from some operators that if they relinquish that, then they won't see it again. And if the pressure was placed on policing, would that result in a sort of dissolution of that service, or a reduction, dilution of that service? So I think there's some nervousness around that in terms of giving up, you'll never see it again. I think probably the closest to the purist model that we envisaged at the outset, the conceptual model, is currently emerging in Wales. And that's largely because the 2 Welsh security operators are saying, well, actually, we can see the benefits of this sort of security of place with one controlling mind. But even then, it's not really moved to the absolute, we're going to give up resources to allow you to dispatch them as you see fit. So I think there's work to do, it's fair to say. But I mean, I'm hugely excited by the opportunity it provides. I would probably temper how quickly you can move to well, let's now do it for 700 million rather than $1 billion to a minister, because I'm not precisely sure how you would pull those levers currently.
Can I just come back on that? Because that's hugely helpful. But I mean, we're going to be put in a position where we're going to have a new minister that's likely only to be in post for 15 months, because that's the average span of junior ministers. And they have to deliver something in their time. So they're looking for bright ideas when they come in. And my experience of them, and there are others around the table who've got greater experience than I have, but my experience of them, no matter what colour they are, and what their background is they want a bright idea that they can do quickly for nothing. And then they can turn around to the Prime Minister, and I've got a pretty good idea who it's going to be, and I've worked for him, and I've got a pretty good idea how he works. It's going to be, I want the bright idea, and it has got to be for nothing. No ifs, no buts, no maybes. And whilst I'm not suggesting for 1 minute it's easy to come up with a product that deals with multiple operators where you're asking them to give up their resource, I think getting that sort of conceptual thing ready would be worth doing. Because if you, with our support, can say to a minister, the way to improve security on the network without spending extra money, I wouldn't offer up savings that we don't know we can do. But if you go into them saying, we can do this and it won't cost any more, that puts us in a better position than a lot of people with other interests in the transport field that will be going to ministers saying, I've got a bright idea, but I need a 5% uplift.
No, so we've definitely got the bright idea, to coin your phrase. I think what we lack currently is the operational lever directly into an operator. So I think that there's a number of ways that a minister could do that. My point being that would largely be within the gift of the minister and beyond my gift, because it's important we're doing it as a partnership. Policing can't be seen to be doing this to industry. I think that would be wholly inappropriate.
Okay, well, there may be an opportunity there. Has anybody else any comments on the Chief Constable's 23-24 report? Noting that it is a statutory report. So we'll note it, Lucy, and thank you very much indeed. And I think it's probably lunchtime, Alistair, isn't it? You're giving me that lunchtime number.
That is a good idea.
So lunch is available across the corridor.
Okay.
Rob, what time do you want us to rejoin?
Say 13:15, 1:15.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. See you then.
We're now on to Sean first.
Yes, so we have Sean, Chair.
Sean, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Disruption.
Members, I've been asked to give a verbal update today in relation to disruption and our progress about reducing disruption on the rail network. Just for a point of note, on the 1st of April, I took over the Chief Officer lead for BTP for disruption after all of the fabulous work that Alan has been doing over the years. I think it'd be helpful, just a brief reminder, Chair, just what we actually mean by disruption. Rail industry own infrastructure and landscape disruption, so anything that happens in terms of the technical issues or actually to the embankments or the rivers and courses, etc. And BTP own and are responsible for what is known as police disruption. And police disruption primarily falls into two categories. Fatalities, which we know, of course, we sadly see almost one a day of. And the second criteria is crime. And crime itself, in terms of disruption, is split down into four key areas. Theft that actually impacts on the operation of the actual railway. Criminal damage that equally impacts, and that includes graffiti, where graffiti artists trespass on the network. Disruption that is classed as non-obstructive, so people taking a short route home, and trespass through actual protests with criminal intent. In terms of our focus and the pressures that we feel as a key partner to the rail industry in managing disruption, whilst there's some 10,000 miles of track, in reality the real focus for us and partners are the West Coast Main Line, Wales and Western Route, and the East Coast Main Line, and of course everything else that follows thereafter, but that is the focus. I think for members, just in key context as well, in terms of Wales and Western, being a key focus for our partner Network Rail at the moment and with our assistance, because they're subject to the ORR investigation that was launched back in November into the performance and compliance with the licence to operate the track. And in relation to a report published just 3 weeks ago, the decision to issue a final order in relation to contravention of that licence. So it's really key we work with our partner to address those issues with them. One of the key comments I wish to share out of that finding of ORR's investigation is that they have been unable to identify a single issue that drives poor performance in relation to disruption on that route, and that's something that we see ourselves. In terms of the response and command of protest, I think it'd be helpful to understand some of the challenges in terms of policing those events that BTP faces. A single person protest, or what we call in the trade as a PIP, person in precarious position, is one of our biggest challenges regarding protest. In terms of who owns those, if it's a bridge or a roadway that goes over the rail network, or it's a building or infrastructure that hangs over the railway, that is commanded by a Home Office police force, one of the 43 police forces in England, Wales and Police Scotland. Of course, BTP are part of that command structure, but that lead is by the Home Office force. If the protest is actually on the railway itself, or the railway goes over a road, such as, for argument's sake, the Stockport flyover, Stockport viaduct, then that is clearly BTP driven, and I've got quite a bit of experience on that one. For every PIP, there must be negotiators. Negotiators operate in pairs to deal with trained people to interact with the person that is causing protest. Of course, in the initial response, BTP or rail industry will, of course, interact and will try and resolve the matter. But in reality, that falls to College of Policing trained negotiators. Quite rightly, we say all of those negotiators sit in either Police Scotland or the 43 Home Office forces. It'd be unrealistic for BTP to have negotiators because of the travelling time to actually cover. Every single fatality or every single PIP is followed by a paper review and deep dive if necessary. One of the key bits in relation to disruption and some of the bits we see in relation to PIP is some of the question that why can't we just go and get these people, why can't we actually resolve the matter a lot quicker? And all sorts of suggestions are made, from inflatable pillows to taser to all sorts of issues there. As a goal commander, whoever's in charge of that incident, they are bound by College of Policing approved professional practice, and that sets out the responsibility for health and safety for all parties involved, the person in protest and in key the people that we are deploying to deal with those incidents. And of course history will show in 1999, following the sad death of PC Sidhu and the serious injury of PC Berkwick, both two commissioners for the Metropolitan Police found themselves in the Old Bailey being prosecuted for breaches of health and safety legislation. Also key in relation to managing the PIP is that in order to go up and to retrieve the person, if they want assistance in coming down, they must be compliant unless there is a threat to life to them or to another person, and then policing will move forward in a more direct action. Blue light partners who are equipped with rescue equipment such as fire and rescue teams will only assist us if that individual is compliant and wishes to return to ground level. In relation to PIPs, we absolutely try everything we can in terms of negotiation, in terms of tactics, in terms of reach out, in terms of go-arounds for the railway. And in fact, the most recent significant PIP that lasted almost 17 hours last week, we even resorted to put in BTP officers, what I'd commonly describe as in riot gear, helmets and shields, in the cab of freight trains to allow that train to pass due to a person on a roof throwing roof tiles at passing trains. It was clearly too risky for passenger trains to move through. One of the issues we also have to manage, and some of the bits that we're working to, is suitable reporting up of top staff into industry, people that are attending our strategic groups, our tactical groups, to make sure that the right information is being passed and that it's a collective decision not to allow the railway to run. Again, an example last week in relation to that the BTP was referenced as requiring the power to be off continuously on the line. That was not the case. That was a decision made by the mobile operation manager for Network Rail on safety issues on the ground there. In terms of fatalities and the disruption where they are, just a snapshot, Chair, I think it'd be helpful to understand. In May last year, sadly, 33 people lost their lives on the railway as a result of fatalities. The average handback time last May was some 93 minutes. This year, in comparison, a reduction in the number of fatalities, thankfully, down to 18, but we've seen an increase in some of the handback times to 110 minutes. And just to understand, geography is absolutely at play in there. The average year-to-day handback time for B Division, so London and the South East, is some 95 minutes so far this year, 118 minutes in C Division and Wales, and 128 minutes in Scotland, and some of the most recent ones have been in the farthest parts of that country. The ORR report into Western and Wales identified a number of issues, and that is played out across all of our management of disruption. Those areas found by the ORR report highlighted, of course, you'd expect fatalities and trespass, but equally track faults, point failures, severe weather impact on the network, and also then the counting and technical infrastructure such as axle counter failures and signalling. The report equally found, similar to our increase in handback times, that in all of the recent reports regarding Wales and Western, Network Rail, or indeed the ORR, were able to identify why the cause for increased delays in response to those incidents are. And that's part of the work that we're assisting Network Rail in relation to Project Brunel, which is Network Rail's response to Wales and Western, and we're sitting at an executive level on there to do everything we can as well. One of the big areas that we're trying to assist industry colleagues with as well is what I call in relation to myth busting in relation to our disruption response. Only 2 weeks ago, following a large disruption due to a fatality, I was informed back from the London National Operations Centre, because there was an issue with CCTV, that in fact BTP has the password to every single CCTV camera in the country, and that was the brief that was going out from the Network Rail Operations Centre. The truth is, Chair, we have passwords to not a single camera because of course, data protection and all the issues that go there, so it's in terms of myth busting and working throughout. Other questions that we've been challenged in recent days or in recent weeks is when we know there's been CCTV at stations, but we've had difficulty accessing, and again on trains, can we not ignore, my words in simplest terms, can we not ignore that CCTV because we can't access it and make a decision regarding a fatality without it? The simplest answer is that would simply not stand up in a coroner's court. We must, of course, understand all of the information available. The way forward is absolutely, and we've seen that even in this week in relation to the disruption in North London, drones is absolutely a way forward for us in reducing our response to disruption time. We're exploring with Network Rail regarding a drones workshop. BTP currently have some 24 operational drones. You'll have know from the Chief's report the increase in the other drone teams as well. But Network Rail equally have some 300 drones that are available, but at this moment in time, through their own recognition, in an uncoordinated fashion. And part of that work is to see how those assets can assist us in reducing our response to disruption. I'm absolutely, in terms of picking up this lead, a firm believer in our work in terms of beyond visual line of sight work, specifically in relation to drone in a box, of knowing some of the jobs I've reviewed, how those long distant flights could absolutely have reduced our response times. Just finalising, Chair, from the brief there, changes made to date, so just to reassure members, our senior duty officers, our SDOs in Palestra, now take tactical lead immediately in terms of every disruption and every fatality. That is something that was not previously in place. As a result of the work with the embed that we have from Network Rail here at BTP in terms of our disruption lead, London NOC now automatically chair pan-industry calls in relation to disruption, and we're working hand in glove with Network Rail alongside with the Chief Executive as well in terms of how we can improve matters, and that personal engagement from myself is working with the systems operations for Network Rail, which is the equivalent of our specialist operations, sitting on the National Performance Board, reporting into Jake Kelly on those matters, and also specifically working with the Western Route Lead, including visits down to the ROC down at Swindon, reviewing our embedded inspectors, reviewing our tasking teams. And the reason I say that with the best possible taste is a lot of the internal advisors, the internal leads within Network Rail are ex-BTP employees, so some of the advice that's been given into Network Rail, which is leading to what I refer as checkbook policing, just pay for specific teams, is actually looking back what I describe into the old toolkit that was available within BTP, and our forward look is very much in relation to new technology, new ways of working. Very much disruption is within our thinking within the OPM, how we deliver in terms of our people, dedicated teams, if that's the right way forward, and of course our response to the more remote areas. Chair, I'll leave that as the update, and of course welcome questions.
Thanks very much, Sean. Does anybody have any questions to put to Sean? And I've got Diane's hand up and then Brian. Over to you, Diane.
I'm sorry, I thought there was someone in front of me. No. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Sean. You sounded a bit weary already, I have to say. So maybe I'm not in the room. Right, quite a lot in terms of what you're focusing on once disruption has happened. Can you talk a little bit about prevention as well? So how much is being done? You mentioned the tasking teams around sort of target hardening, you know, because once an incident has happened in the first place, 9 times out of 10 it's too late, you know. So can you talk a little bit more about what you're doing around the prevention in the first place? And I'm sure AI will kind of come into this as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Diane. So very much Lucy's drive in this area is very much what I would describe as shifting the culture towards prevention and disruption within the force. Predominantly, one of the risks of dedicated teams is our personnel see the problem of prevention for disruption being the responsibility of a dedicated team rather than the entire workforce. Because of our current operating model with the focus on TOCs and the focus on gate lines, it is often just specific taskings that some of the work is line of route, and we know line of route is some of the biggest areas of disruption for us. Some of the other things that are at play is not every route, in fact the majority of routes don't have a dedicated tasking team. So some of that work again is in relation to OPM, making sure that tasking and policing of disruption is very much at the focus of the force tasking that Paul Fennell runs, and equally in that space as well is picking up the recommendations after fatalities. We know, working with Network Rail, a high proportion of the recommendations through the Designing Out Crime Unit after a fatality are not actually taken up on a risk-based basis, but we're working through that with systems operations to address that, to take that forward.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Sean. And there I think is the nub of the issue, isn't it, really? Because quite often you'll get a series of recommendations, unless they're absolutely kind of followed through, then, here we are, we end up with another sort of similar incident, that might well be a good lead indicator for us to look at in future, I think, Ron, in terms of completed recommendations. For the industry, it's something to bring into sort of stakeholder meetings moving forwards.
Thanks very much. Brian?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think particularly good to hear, the West and that part of the industry is in trouble, so really good to hear you talk so, detailed around that and the support BTP are giving. I just had a really quick point. In the actions right at the beginning, I think action 1 and 3, so action 1 was around giving members sight of the Pangbourne review. I don't think we've had that yet, but it implies that we covered here. And then action 3 was, I think, Ron, you'd said members to have a little bit of a brief around disruption. Don't know if that's what you've just done now.
Yes.
Or, okay, so action 3 is done, but yeah, action 1, Pangbourne. And again, we talked about Kensington earlier, if there's possibility to have any sight of that, and I think it was suggested earlier, maybe having an option for a member to sit in those debriefs, because clearly what the industry say to us as members, and then when we come here and what you say, there's a mismatch there, I think it's fair to say. So if we can help with that and building both sides, more than happy, I think, between us to try and make time for those. But if we could have sight Pangbourne and maybe Kensington, if it's been done yet, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Chair, if I may very briefly just comment on the Kensington matter. So a really good point. That comes back to my briefing up point. That decision in relation to the 17 hours of delay, the partnership agreement was that we would focus on releasing freight on that line of route. That was because, mindful public meeting, due to a critical national infrastructure feed along that line, that decision was taken. All operators were fully cited on that. But we later found out in the course of the day that wasn't briefed up to seniors, and the view was we wasn't focusing on passenger rail, and that was an actual decision by the entire partnership.
Yeah,
and that would have been because of
earlier,
only one passenger train would have gone through an hour, and the decision that would equally have caused as much disruption than focusing on the freight.
And it is a really difficult route because it's a network rail infrastructure, they own it, but TfL run a lot of services there, so it's an interesting balance, but it probably is NR's call. But yeah, if we could see Pangbourne and anything at Kensington, that was it. Thank you.
Bishop.
And that really brings home the risks around Chinese whisperers, doesn't it? And kind of the importance of good channels of information. So yeah, really interesting to know that. Two quick things from me. So, and thank you very much. The briefing was really informative. Is there anything more that you can say about how you use management information to target what you're doing in this area, or what to kind of help manage resources? And then the other thing was just to follow up. I think I tried to hook up what you're doing with what Transport Focus are doing. Did they return your phone calls, or do I need to nag them?
I'll follow up with you afterwards. Yes.
Whoa, that sounds like I need to nag them. Okay, let's have a quick word after.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And in terms of data, that is actually one of the gaps that's been identified as an example, in the OOR report for Wales and Western. There's very much generic information. We've got more information about fatalities, but of course, as many members will know, there's disruption in terms of trespass on the railway every single day. Thankfully, most of it doesn't escalate to a serious issue. But in terms of that specific locations where they are, that's a gap that we recognise and working through with.
Thank you. Anybody, any other questions or points? Paula?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really helpful. And forgive my ignorance about this, but to what extent are these disruptions caused by people who are intent on causing disruption versus people who are intent on performing some other act?
Yes.
The result of which is disruption.
Yeah, so in terms of protest, the vast majority of the elongated incidents, the ones that take significant time, are all deliberate acts. And one of the sad bits of society that we're working through as well, so a specific example in relation to the Kensington incident, and again I say that's 17 hours, the outcome of that, despite arrest, is a return to a mental health treatment centre for 28 days. So mental health absolutely plays a significant part, and we're finding a lot of our evidence is people in crisis are drawn to the railway because of lack or withdrawal of services elsewhere. So that's something that we're working on. So it's the majority are deliberate intents to cause disruption.
Is that growing?
Sorry, Paul. The other two categories I just add is one is around evasion of capture, so when they're effectively on the run from us generally, or fare evasion. So essentially where they're going off platform ends to avoid gate lines. So we know that there are a number of hotspots across the country where that is an issue. So.
Anybody else? I noticed, Diane, you've still got your hand up. Is that a ghost hand? Okay. I think I'll work that out. Anybody else, anything they want to say? Sean, thank you very much for that. Those are the follow-up points you've been given, but thank you for a very comprehensive report. Thank you. Right. Chief Executive's report.
So there's a report in your pack. It's relatively straightforward, I hope, covering some of the issues I've been interested or before this meeting. I was going to highlight 4 elements. Actually, many we've already covered in this meeting, but I'll just mention them so that you know that they were prominent in my mind. So the first element was essentially the enhanced financial oversight that you agreed at the end of January and the delivery of it. I'd say that's a work in progress. And we talked about the new protocol under our Code of Governance that we need to devise. So that's sort of one key element for me. Another not mentioned in this meeting so far was just to confirm that we, the authority and trustees, have reached agreement on a valuation of the staff pension scheme for 2022. So didn't quite manage that at the last authority meeting, but you have managed to help us with that outside of the meeting. Haven't signed the paperwork yet and sent it off, but I believe that will now be a formality. Third bit, which I shouldn't really mention, is just the cost allocation model, because you had a breakfast briefing on it and we have got an item on that a little bit later, but it takes up a fair amount of my time and it's very significant to us in the executive, so I wanted to draw that to your attention. And the last thing, sort of slightly different plane as it were, Ron, is just decisions between meetings. So the last section of my paper lists the number of decisions that you have taken in between meetings, and and actually at this point in time, in parallel with us meeting in this room, you've got a recruit training business case which you have been considering, and many of you have offered comments on already, and I wanted not to apologise for that. So by which I mean, I think I did inherit a situation where those kinds of business cases generally got taken at committee or full authority meetings. But it does seem to me, and I know that Ron agrees, that's why I dare to say this, that these are not good use of your time when you're together in a room. We should be having the most strategic conversations we could manage for the sort of directional for the force and the authority going forward. But because of our governance, there are various items you do need to approve and you do need to consider in adequate time. So I know it looks odd to sort of send you something by email in parallel when you know you're getting together, but that is a deliberate act. And I'm always just putting it out there in case people feel very uncomfortable with it. It seems, and it is a little bit of my own personal way of working. As I said, I would very much enjoy the chance to have a week to look at an item, and I look at it at whatever time I choose, be it 10 o'clock at night or 6 in the morning, up to me, rather than adding it to the sort of 200 pages of paper you've already got for a meeting in front of you. So there's a risk that it's my personal working style infecting us here. So there's a chance for you to say no. But you'll look at my paper. Actually, we've put quite a few items past you since the last meeting. I think that's more than usual. It isn't part of a growing trend. I think these things wax and wane. But what I wanted to say is it's deliberate. And until and unless you all tell us you'd much rather take them in a meeting, we're going to try and facilitate this outside of meetings. The more what I would call transactional decision making. That was it from me, Ron.
Thanks, Hugh. Anyone, any points or questions for Hugh? Emir?
Just a quick one. So there are a lot of ALBs who are doing a pitch deck for incoming government. Have you thought of anything along those lines?
Well, I'd say yes, we've thought of it, and no, we're not doing it.
Okay.
We continue to talk, and we have met the sponsor team, Ron and myself, during the election period, and I'll speak to Lucy about the opportunities, but I don't think we've got anything for ministers on day 1 or even day 20.
I think we certainly met with the sponsor team, and one of the agenda items was what we wanted to get across to new ministers. And I think the first point we wanted to make was that we exist, that we're not a Home Office force, that we belong to the DFT, and this is what the force does, and these are the issues which we face. And they promised to reflect that in what goes up in their red or blue book compilation. But we have no power or stretch in terms of what actually goes in and what actually goes before ministers.
And as far as when we I guess when you get onto the substance, there's a couple of things. One is, we talked about the integrated security and policing a few times in this meeting, so that definitely was part of our conversation. Candidly, a lot of our ability to get that to move does rest on the department leaning into it, which they haven't had the bandwidth to do so far. So, again, not a first day issue, but definitely one we're going to want to work with the sponsor team to move into ministers when it's the right time. Is secondly, yes, conversations about the process of rail reform when Great British Rail or its or whatever it becomes is implemented, what the implications of that will be for BTP and BTPA. Those are conversations we've been having, but again, not for day one is the kind of conclusion we've come to. So we've been having those conversations, but we're not.
No, thank you for that. The only thing is the resource allocation that we use now. There's something so substantive that I wondered if there was a way to be an exemplar, so that somebody come in and go, "This is fantastic. Can I use it elsewhere?" and so forth. Because it's a lot of number of years of work that's gone into it. And I should just say, amongst many of the ALBs I'm involved with, there's very few who are not doing a pitch deck. I completely understand it. It's a decision by yourselves to do. But I just wanted to just mention about the model.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emir. Any other points from anybody? Tricia?
Quick bureaucrat's point, really, and it may just be me. So I'm absolutely fine with the Archer Committee decisions. I think that's perfectly sensible. I can't help hankering after a slightly different way of us all engaging in that, rather than seeing that 15 emails suddenly appearing one after. And I wonder whether there might be a different way of logging our collective decision making, because it is. I don't envy Alistair or whoever is at the receiving end of all of that. Sometimes everybody copies everything to everybody. Sometimes they don't. Is there a more elegant way of making that happen at a practical level?
So there is new functionality in board intelligence for e-signatures, which I propose to roll out, having briefed members before I do so.
Okay.
That will help, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll talk to Alistair.
So that would involve us logging in then to put all the things, all our comments all in one place, like SharePoint.
I can certainly look into it.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Anybody, anything else on the Chief Executive's report? You'll be pleased I'm not placing a bet to see how quickly you can get a WhatsApp group with the new ministers, Chief Constable.
I don't do WhatsApp groups.
Touché. Okay. We now come to the committee minutes, and as usual, you'll have seen all these committee minutes in your background pack, and I invite in turn the chairs of those committees to raise any points or anything they wish to draw our attention to. So, shall we start with finance, legitimacy and performance?
We shall. As Craig was leaving the room, he asked me to do this for him. But,
nice
that's
one.
all right. So I mean, what I would say, so it's finance, legitimacy and performance. Actually, finance, you've had a sort of a summary of what went before the committee, and also in performance. We had a fairly long conversation, which was a summary of what went before the committee. So I would, in the legitimacy space, at the 15th of May meeting, a couple of things I'd draw out. There was a proper focus on the use of custody by British Transport Police. That is something, is one of the key responsibilities of BTPA. It's not something that we normally bring to the full authority. It is delegated to the Finance, Legitimacy and Performance Committee. And I would say the members present and chief officers present talked about how the authority could understand and be assured on BTP's use of custody. I'm going to say round numbers, try not to catch the eye of anybody in Chief Officer Group to correct me. Around a third of detainees for British Transport Police go to Brewery Road, which is our own custody suite, in not very far from here. So 2/3 are housed by Home Office or Police Scotland forces. That's something important to bear in mind, because as soon as you are handed over to the custody sergeant for another force, you significantly become part of that custody sergeant's responsibilities. So it's quite hard for the committee to sort of calibrate the two different levels of oversight. But I would say overall, those managers of custody present, when asked what was their biggest concern at the moment. It was about bail management of BTP prisoners and just changes in recent years, and for officers across the force to understand what their responsibilities are and do that in a timely way. So that was the sort of headline concern that we took from the committee amongst all the, which there was a plan for and was not an overbearing concern, but number one, it was a number one concern, which was instructive. Second item was just an update on external scrutiny. So there's a new team in place working in Rachel's area of command, I think, and they were present and gave us an update on their work with independent advisory groups, which the committee found, I think they found there was quite a lively discussion and had some confidence that that was going to lead to more tangible interaction between these IAGs and the COG and the authority particularly. But those are the two items I'd draw out.
Thank you. Any other points or questions on those minutes? Thank you very much. Strategy and planning?
Yeah, just because of the timing during the year, this tends to be the meeting where the agenda's lightest, and that's probably reflected this time. We had good updates on strategy and on the hub that's being developed to deal with NTPF and the associated strategy work within the force. I suppose the thing that took most of our time was looking at Buckingham Palace Road with an update, which I've been lucky enough, having shadowed Steph not long ago, to have seen that really is now in, I think, a very, very good place. You know, we're just about to start cutting metal in anger, and you know, things appear to be in good order. So that was probably the biggest topic that we had back in May.
Thanks very much. Any points on that from anybody? We content to note those minutes. Thank you. Scotland, Ian.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of things to highlight in terms of partnership. The biggest partnership items at the recent committee weren't really about Police Scotland. They were about ScotRail and their Head of Safety, Risk and Assurance, who gave us a presentation about the ScotRail Travel Safe team and their work, and the partnership that's going on there, both with BTPA and Police Scotland, but also wider with local authorities. We also had a visit from the Railway Mission, the Railway Pastors in Scotland, and they outlined their work as well, and I think that's of great value to BTP officers and staff, but also the wider rail network. And as we look forward, I think it's important that we are to receive some further work at the next meeting on beyond line of sight drones and how that might be consulted on in Scotland prior to implementation. And also we're developing the risk package that we receive and the performance packages, and also the feedback from members of the public through the surveys, all to bring a specific context when they're reporting to the Railway Policing Committee.
Thanks very much, Ian. Any points or questions? A question from me, Ian, about this management of beyond line of sight drones and the like. Forgive my ignorance, but I don't think airspace management's devolved, is it?
No,
I thought so.
It's not devolved, Chair. I think the committee are just conscious that if something's rolled out without making wider sort of public and political awareness in Scotland, sure, it might cause issues, yeah, and it's better that we just make sure that that is flagged up front, shall we say, so that people are aware of it.
That makes sense. Thank you very much indeed. Content to note those minutes? Thank you. Audit and risk, Kenna?
Yes, just a couple of things to note. Much of the meeting was taken up with looking at the external audit and the annual report and accounts, but a couple of other points to note. We finalised last year's audit programme, and the GIAA brought in their annual opinion, which is their look in the round about how we've performed across the year in terms of controls and governance, and their annual opinion was moderate, which is what it has been for the last 3 years, I think. But there was a slight nudge of improvement from the prior year, which is good to see. They don't just look at the 8 audits they do throughout the year, they look at various other themes and trends. So that was the audit opinion, and then just to let colleagues know that the Public Sector Fraud Authority have notified us that they're going to be coming in and doing an audit on our fraud and bribery controls, which I think is taking place in September. So that should build on the work that's already happening within the force and the authority.
Any questions or points? Thanks, and okay, we'll take those as noted. And last but by no means least, people in culture. Nick?
Thank you. So it's a relatively refreshed committee in terms of membership, with 3 of our recent joiners adding their weight to the committee. And we tried to sort of change the tone focus, which isn't reflected in the minutes, but we're trying to get the balance between information sharing and discussion and challenge and support a bit more focused. So the first thing for colleagues to note is, with a lot of help from Susan, who's been silent today, and Tricia and Rachel and her team, we've got a much more focused data set now, and we will continue to refine that. But we're trying to look at, trends, benchmarks, forecasts, rather than snapshots. And I think that will help us going forward. That takes me on to the second point. We had a very helpful briefing about deployability issues and temporary duty restrictions. And I think the big myth and legend that hit me, and I think hit colleagues, is although everybody talks about the large numbers of police officers who are suspended and therefore not deployable, which is obviously a bad thing, as a percentage of numbers that are not deployable on TDR, they're very small. And you take out 1 or 2 very large jobs that will go, and that becomes even smaller. So that, I think, is important, because actually the non-deployable officers, and I know that's not the correct term, but those on TDR, are as a result of injuries at work. And that's inevitable given the work that our police colleagues do. So it was also useful, again, to have the comparative data with Home Office forces. And of course the point that's made repeatedly, quite rightly, by the Chief Constable when she attends these meetings, is that her officers probably see more fatalities and more unpleasant scenes than their counterparts in Home Office forces. So is it any wonder that there's a need for support for that? So I think we were quite reassured that, although the headline figure was over 10% of our officers we can't use on any given day, we understood a lot more about the reasons behind it. So that was the second point I wanted to mention. And the third point was, certainly the first time since I've been here, we had a frontline perspective, which we intend to have as a regular feature, where we'll invite somebody, or we'll invite the force to put somebody up to talk to us about their experiences. And the first person we had was a firearms sergeant who's done a short stint as Rachel's staff officer on return from maternity leave, and she blew us away, and she gave us amazing perspective. She gave us a perspective from what it's like to be a firearms officer, regardless of gender. She gave us a perspective of what it's like to be one half of a couple where your other half is also in the force, and she gave us a perspective on what it's like when you've got caring responsibilities, having to go away on residential courses, and the interplay. And she was hugely positive about the force and about the way the force had made it possible for her to do her job.
Well, that's good to hear.
That was was, I think colleagues would agree, there's 4 of us sitting along this side of the table. I don't know whether Stuart's still on the line, but she set a very high bar for colleagues to follow. But gave us the feel-good factor at the end of the meeting.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear.
So that's
anybody, any points or questions for Nick, please? Content to note those minutes? Thank you very much. Now, there was, as you know, an Appointments, Remuneration and Appraisal Committee meeting the other week, 21st, I think it was. I think we have discussed most of the salient issues in those meetings in other fora and other parts of this meeting. I have nothing further to add. And I think if there's anything else anybody wants to ask, they can pick it up with me later. That's okay. And the minutes will be out in due course. Item 16, the work plan.
Thank you, Chair. Standing item, obviously due for revision in light of your ambition to have some more strategic conversations at the board going forward.
Anybody, any comments or questions? Andy?
I said I'd come back to it, very much in the spirit of you wanting to change the nature of the meeting. I had a long session with Carolyn on fixing the fundamentals, which is the IT strategic project that was really launched here, I think, in a paper in March 22. So most of the new recruits won't have seen it unless they've been looking back. And we went through, and I was really very impressed with the extent to which it's been delivered over 2 and a bit years, the extent to which new things have been discovered as a result of working on those things and been solved. So there's important feedback there. And really new issues that have cropped up that needed to be added to it. So I suggested to Carolyn that we really ought to bring it here because I think it would be useful. I also said to her, I don't think it would be helpful to forget the original paper. So could she sort of use that as the basis for the presentation so people kind of understood where we started from? You know, we didn't want something else that was just written for today. Carolyn was happy to do that and suggested, because she briefs the chief every quarter, that having done so in July, that would be a good time subsequently to come here with your support. And I think, therefore, the September meeting would be a really good time. And I think with all the other discussion around cyber security at the moment, which of course is something I sense they manage really very well, part of this process and their other work, you know, we really do need to keep an eye on where that is. And of course, a lot of the work they've done is supporting a lot of the other big projects, like the move to Buckingham Palace Road and getting out of this building. So there's an awfully big story to tell, but I think it's important that it's linked back to the original proposition of this is what we said we'd do, and this is where we are.
Okay, I think that makes a good idea. Everybody happy with that? Anybody else, any comments on the work plan?
Ryan?
Yeah.
Has the date changed? Because I have the September meeting as the 1st of October, and I see here we've got the 26th of September, which doesn't ring a bell with me.
It's the 1st of October, the 26th is a typo.
1st of October, definitely, Willie.
Yeah, so the work plan shows the 26th, that's just a typo.
Yes.
Right, okay, thanks.
Anybody, anything else on the work plan? If you do subsequently have any thoughts about it, then please don't hesitate to email Alistair. We'll pick them up. This is the point of the meeting where I ask members if there's any other business they wish to raise that's competent to this meeting. Anybody? I shall take it as no other business. And I now move that we have the exclusion of the public as we move into private session. Could people content we do that? Yes.
We can end the live stream, please.